From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, my name is Eugene Flanagan. I'm the Director of National Programs at the Library of Congress, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this morning's masterclass, the kickoff event of our day-long symposium. The symposium is sponsored by the library's Poetry and Literature Center, as well as the Folger Shakespeare Library, the PEN/Faulkner Foundation, and the Cave Canem Foundation. I want to thank them, and I want to thank We Need Diverse Books, the grassroots organization responsible for coordinating today's masterclass, and whose goal is, and I quote, to produce and promote literature that reflects and honors the lives of all young people, and in doing so, to create a world in which all children can see themselves in the pages of a book. The symposium and this morning's masterclass in particular started with one writer, Kwame Alexander. I would like to thank Kwame for his work with the Poetry and Literature Center and for applying a full-court press to create the terrific programming that we and the Folger Shakespeare Library are presenting today. And thank you for appreciating that one. Kwame is a poet, educator, and author of 21 books. He has written books for children of all ages, including Surf's Up, a picture book, Booked, a middle grade novel, and He Said, She Said, a young adult novel. His book, The Crossover, received the 2015 John Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children, and the Lee Bennett Hopkins Poetry Award, presented annually to an American poet or anthologist for the most outstanding new book of children's poetry. Kwame also works with students in the classroom through Books in a Day, his program that teaches and empowers teenagers to write and publish their own books. And he's the founder of Leap for Ghana, an international literacy project that builds libraries, trains teachers, and empowers children through literature. He has said, again, I quote, "Writing is active, writing is action, writing is activism. Writing is being part of the world, and that's what I like to do." As he gets us started here today, please join me in welcoming a man of words and actions, Kwame Alexander.
Wow, I said all that? Thank you, Eugene. Thank you to the Library of Congress, to the Center for Poetry and Literature, to the Center of the Book. Thank you to Robert and Anya for being excited and open to this opportunity. Almost a year, if not more, maybe 8 or 9 months ago. And here's how it happened. I was on the phone with a friend of mine named Jacqueline Woodson, and we text maybe once a week to find out if we're in the same city, because that's really the only time we get to see each other. Are you in Minneapolis? No, I'm in Milwaukee. You know, we're close, but we're not there. And I said, I was talking to my editor at Houghton Mifflin, which is the publisher of The Crossover, and I said, Margaret, do you all have any black editors? Y'all have any editors of color? You should really think about hiring somebody. And this happened because it happened because I had been thinking about it, but I was sort of moved to contact her immediately because I had received an email from Jason Lowe. And Jason said, Kwame, we're doing a survey. Can we get your publisher involved? And I was like, I don't know if they're gonna move on that, but maybe there's another way I can go about this, so let me call and see if I can, sort of probe them to hire some black editors. I had a little bit of cachet at this time because I had just read an article in Publishers Weekly that said Houghton Mifflin's, their fourth quarter results were significantly higher than last year because of 3 things: some cookbook, some educational unit they had purchased from Scholastic, and the sales of The Crossover. So I said, let me try to use a little bit of leverage. And my editor's response was, Kwame, we've tried. We've looked for editors of color, and there just aren't a whole lot out there. Now, 2 things. One, that's a cop-out. We all know that. And number two, well, if it's a cop-out, where are the editors? Where are the writers? Where are the marketers? Where are the people of color who need to be in children's book publishing? And so I texted Jackie and said, Jackie, let's do a master class. I'm going to propose this to the Library of Congress. And let's get editors, writers, publishers, marketers, promoters of the future of color in a room. And let's just share what we have to say, to share what we've been through. And Robert and Anya were on board, and I called up friends of mine in the industry, Cassandra from Scholastic, Jenny Brown, now at Random House, Knopf, Jason from Lee and Low, and everybody said yes. And so that's how we ended up here in this room. It started with an email from Jason, a text to Jackie, and it really speaks to how things work in this industry in particular, and just in America in general. You can't know what you don't know. And the way you find out things is by people who are interested and concerned and care enough to be able to share things with you, resources, opportunities, tools, tips, tricks, and techniques. And I think that's why we're here today. Would you agree? So by a show of hands, people who want to write or who are writing. Excellent. People who want to be involved or are involved in the business of literature and publishing. Lovely, lovely, that's so important. Librarians, teachers. Excellent. And so we're all here together under one roof. I think the end goal of today is for us to certainly be inspired, but more importantly, it's for us to leave here with some practical sort of guidance, some rules, as they were, that are going to propel us forward. So we've got 55 people in this room. There's no reason why 5, 10, or 15 of y'all, when you leave here today, aren't actively pursuing your dream, your idea of what it means for you to be a part of the world of children's book publishing. And it is a beautiful world. And here's the cool part about children's literature and publishing when it compares to other aspects of the publishing world. There is no competition. Well, no, let me not say that. Let me not say it like that. There is no competitive energy amongst us. When you're in the room where it happens, we are all trying to support and encourage each other. I wish I had gotten into children's books a long time ago. There is a spirit of love. There is cooperation. Yeah, it's competitive. Everybody wants to sort of do their thing and be successful, but we all support each other. And you can't ask for a better industry if you're a part of writing to be in. I tell poets all the time in particular, if you want to make some money, get into children's books. We spend a lot of time writing, as poets, we spend a lot of time writing and submitting and trying to get our poems published, and it's wonderful, and we do it not to make money. What Robert Frost said, there's no poetry in money and no money in poetry. We don't do it to make money. We do it because we love to do it. But at some point, you have a family. I have 2 kids and I have a wife, and you have to figure out how to sort of, marry the art and the commerce. And so how do you do that? I posit that if you're a poet, you write a wonderful book of 40 or 50 poems, and it's, you sell 3,000 or 4,000 copies. And it's okay, it's cool, and you get critical acclaim, and you love it, and you share, and you do your readings and so forth. Versus you write one poem, and it's a picture book, and maybe you sell 5,000 or 10,000 copies of this picture book, and it's one poem. See, people, we're gonna get real today. We're gonna talk, we're not gonna come up here and talk theory, we're gonna talk dollars and cents, because this is about you all moving forward in this industry and having some modicum of understanding of how it works so that you can be successful. Kwame off his soapbox. Thank you, Eugene, for that wonderful introduction, and for the reminders of the fact that, yes, this is about art and commerce, but it's also about the responsibility that you all have to to help kids imagine a better and a brighter world. Poetry is activism. Children's literature is activism. So, this is going to be a great day. Anya hasn't held up her 5 minutes, have you? Okay, 3 minutes, okay. So, I mentioned that I called some people to have them to make sure they were in the room today. And first up, I suppose how this is going to work is our experts in the field. We have editors, we have publishers, we have writers, we have just some wonderful people here today. They're going to come up and present and share sort of their experience and some tools with you, and then we'll do a Q&A. And I have a few questions in case you all get a little shy, but this is your chance, so certainly jot down your questions as you're listening. About 10 years ago, I submitted to a contest to get my children's book published. And at this point in time, this was the only publisher that seemed like they were involved and invested in promoting, publishing diverse books. How many of you are familiar with Lee and Low Books? Of course, you are. Jason Lowe is the publisher and the co-owner of Lee and Low Books, the largest multicultural children's book publisher in the United States. Founded in 1991, the year I moved from Virginia Tech to Arlington, Virginia, which means this is their 25th anniversary. It was named the 2014 Indie Publisher of the Year by Forward Magazine. The Eric Carle Museum selected Lee and Low as the recipient of the Angel Award for its dedication to diverse books. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first presenter, a friend, a figure in the publishing industry who has been a part of the diverse books movement before there was a movement. And we'll get into that a little later. Please welcome Jason Lowe.
Morning, how are you? Excellent. All right, so I don't have to cover the 25th anniversary thing because it's already been covered, but it is a major milestone for us. I guess in the next 45 minutes, 40 minutes maybe, I'm gonna sort of start out and talk about how it all started, our progress through the years, and then where we are now. I guess the first question that I'm going to answer is that why is it even necessary for a company like Lee and Low Books to exist? And so, the world we live in is very diverse. And this shot here is sort of like, it always reminds me of when I lived in Queens and I would take the F train into the city to go to work. I mean, this is really my worldview. This is what I always think the world looks like. And also the fact is that the US Census Bureau in 2014 basically cited that children under the age of 5 years old had become a minority majority. On top of that, the census also added by 2020 that all kids under the age of 18 would become a minority majority. So literally, that's 4 years from now. I mean, that's practically here, right? So I think what's interesting about that, in contrast, is that these numbers are pulled from this Cooperative Children's Book Center in Madison, Wisconsin, and they keep track of the new diverse books published each year. And despite the population being overall 37% people of color, we only have, over the span of 22 years, 10% of new children's book published each year have any kind of multicultural content. So we have a huge disconnect, a huge separation from what the world looks like and then what the view of books looks like in terms of whose experiences are captured in the pages of books. Now, in the beginning, when we started, we could basically manage to do the very basics. And what I mean by the basics is we could afford to publish a few books, we could afford to send them out for review, we would post the reviews and awards on our website, which I built actually in the early days. Back then, there was no web. It was all, marketing was basically reliant on the US Postal Service. So you would purchase thousands of names and you would mail a couple catalogs out to those names. And then we could also go to conferences with our distributors. So all in all, those are the basics. It's not a winning formula for getting your books known. But luckily, in our very first list, we published Baseball Saved Us. Now, the story behind Baseball Saved Us is that it's a book about the Japanese internment camp, right? And so we came out with 3 books in our first list, and the distributor that was going to basically carry our books liked the other 2 books that we did, but did not like Baseball Saved Us. They basically said this book is way too dark. This is not going to have any kind of audience whatsoever. So they dropped us as a distributor. And so we had to essentially find another distributor. So after we did that, got everything squared away, got the book out there, we landed a full-page review in the New York Times, right? And so in one fell swoop, right out of the gate, Baseball Saved Us put us on the map. So essentially, baseball's done a few things. It established a bar for us in terms of what was possible, about which stories you could tell to kids. And it's also sort of outlines, good timing. In the early 90s, there was a big push for multicultural books. We were just coming on the scene. The timing was good. I think luck had something to do with it. But then also pushing the envelope and really, sort of testing what is possible, in terms of stories for kids. Okay, so this is a, multi-tool Leatherman. And the reason why I show this is not because of my interest in, doing handiwork around the house, but it's sort of to illustrate a point that when you are in a startup, there are some advantages to being in a startup, and some of those advantages are that if you come up with a strategy, there aren't like layers of management to sort of weed through to employ that strategy, or if you want to change that strategy, you just change it. There's not a lot of discussion involved. But there are distinct disadvantages to being in a startup. And some of those disadvantages are that you essentially wear all the hats. I mean, when I started in Lee & Low 18 years ago, I started as the website designer. I was the network administrator. If your computer had a problem, I was that guy. I was the marketing manager. I did order processing, human resources, hiring, firing, managing people. I worked in the editorial department. I was an art director, did all, oversaw all of our promotional materials. And then on top of that, there was the role of running a business. So I think, sort of what that illustrates is that actually sounds kind of cool. Like that's like the kind of job where it never gets dull and years can fly by because you're always doing something different. But what that illustrates is that a lot of publishers, who maybe have very niche missions, get stuck in the startup mode where they essentially wear all the hats. They can afford to publish some books, send them out for review, that type of thing, but they never grow to the next stage, And I know there are many small publishers who have been around for decades and they're still at that stage. So it's very hard to sort of influence what's going on if you're still just scrambling to do the basics. Now, historically, publishing, it was a cottage industry. You know, it was built on selling books to sort of mom and pop companies known as independent bookstores. The relationship mostly worked back then because, you know, the booksellers were very knowledgeable. They didn't overorder, you know, and when they did have some books that they didn't sell, they could take that unsold stock and they could basically return it to the publisher for a credit. And this was an industry standard or courtesy at the time, right? So that model was pretty much blown to pieces when the superstores came onto the scene, right? And so we tried for many years to work with B&N and Borders and things like that. But the thing is, the reason working with them didn't work was, it was partially because of that industry courtesy of returning books. And so let me just walk you through this, right? So let's say you publish a book and you print 10,000 copies of that book, right? So then Barnes & Noble comes, they see your new books, and then they say, oh, you know, we like this book. We're going to buy 5,000 copies. And you're like, great, here you go, you know? And so then they have the 5,000, you're left with 5,000, right? So then you basically concentrate on selling down those 5,000 copies. And then boom, you know, a few months later, whatever, you've done it, right? So you got to go back and reprint that title so you can keep selling it. So then at the end of the year, Barnes & Noble would come back and they would return any unsold stock that they didn't sell. Now, the thing is, that's a problem because they have Barnes & Nobles all over the place, right? So let's say they bought that 5,000 copies, all of a sudden we were seeing like 80% returns or whatever. So then you would have all of this stock come back into the warehouse, and that would be on top of the stock that you just reprinted, right? So the way that works in independent publishing, I don't know how it works in the larger houses, is that you want to keep about a year's worth of inventory on hand, right? But then with the returns, all of a sudden you have 2 to 3 years worth of inventory hanging out in your warehouse that you have to pay for to basically house there. So it basically causes an inventory nightmare. You got a glut of inventory sitting in the warehouse. It just messes with your cash flow because all your money is tied up in inventory. So really that did not work for us, you know, in terms of working with the superstores. Now, Amazon is basically came onto the scene and basically destroyed, you know, the superstores. I mean, Borders is gone, B&N is on the ropes now, you know, and it's really, you know, and I would say though that they're much better at selling books. You know, I mean, they got all the algorithms, they got the code. Basically, you know, when they get books, they sell books. They return very little, so that's a good thing. But the bad thing is the big picture of publishing, right? The thing is, Amazon really operates in a very uneven playing field, and I'm going to tell you why. Because they basically buy books on consignment, right? And so that means they don't have to put any money down, right? And then they sell their books, whereas independent booksellers and superstores, they got to buy any books that they sell, right? So uneven playing field right there. So it's not as even if you could say to Amazon, well, we can't do this consignment thing anymore. You don't bargain with Amazon. They do what they want to do, and there isn't any discussion, right? So I'm saying that Amazon basically creates, you know, an unlevel playing field, since the superstores, you know, are on the ropes, and as well as the independent booksellers. I think it's an unhealthy environment, you know, because essentially we're heading toward a monopoly, and monopolies aren't good, right? I mean, at one point, Amazon was in negotiation with one of the big houses. They didn't like the way the negotiations were going. They took away all their buy buttons, right? I mean, that's not the way you partner with someone, you know, that you're working with long term. That's just, you know, being a bully, being the big guy, you know, doesn't have to listen to you or anyone, okay? So that's, the thing is, there is a price to be paid for one-click purchases and having drones bringing packages to your doorstep. Okay, so what did work for us? What worked for us was the school market and the school library market. And the reason that this works for us is because they don't return books, okay? Essentially, you can manage what you're doing. It's you sell something, it stays sold. You know, that's the way you got to go there. So that works for us, okay? All right, so where are we? So getting back to what Lee and Low Books is up to. So back in 2000, we launched the New Voices Award. And I would call the New Voices Award kind of re-upping on your mission. You know, before, actually, did I even say what our mission was before? Remind me. All right, I'm going to say it now. Anyway, the mission of Lee and Low Books is to fill the void of diverse books that are not present in the publishing industry right now, and to work with and nurture authors and illustrators of color, okay? Okay, now, back here, right, with the New Voices Award. Essentially, what we were seeing was that there was an exorbitant amount of diverse books being published by white authors, right? So we said to ourselves, okay, we're going to have to re-up on the mission, make a concerted effort to reach out to authors of color. And so what this award does is it publishes authors who have not been published before and who are people of color for picture book manuscripts, right? So one of those books is Juna's Jar, excuse me. And Juna's Jar is a New Voices Award winner. It's about friendship, it's about imagination, but I think most importantly, it's got this universal message of, you know, when your friend moves away, your best friend moves away, you know, on feeling that pain, dealing with that pain, but also through fantasy, you know, in Juna's Jar, she gets to finally say goodbye to her best friend in her fantasy life, even though she didn't get to do it in her real life, you know. So it's a really sweet book. It was reviewed by the New York Times and everything and did really well. Second book here is Little Melba and Her Big Trombone. So this book is about Melba Liston, and she was a trombonist and arranger. She worked with all the greats, Dizzy Gillespie, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and so the book does a good job of talking about the gender and racial issues that she faced, because really the music business was an old boys club, you know, so you had that working against her, you know, but it also captures the love, you know, and the frenetic, you know, excitement of jazz. And that's really done through, you know, our illustrator, Frank Morrison, who did an amazing job on this book. The third book here is Olenguito, right? And this book it's got a lot in it, right? I mean, it's about exploration, it's about science and environment, it's an alphabet book, it's bilingual, so it's good for dual language studies. But it's got this great message about discovery, because, you know, basically it was believed in science that all mammals had been cataloged already, had been discovered. There wasn't any new mammals out there. But then a few years back, they discovered the Olenguito. And so I think it's like a great message to put out to kids that, you know, that you can still find new things in the world. And it even has a Where's Waldo component to it, where kids can look for the naturalist who's searching for the Olenguito throughout the book, so there's that as well. Okay, imprints. So the way we've been able to grow is through a combination of homespun imprints, as well as some we've gotten through acquisition. So Bebop Books, that's our imprint for kids who are just learning how to read. Two Books was the idea of editor Stacy Whitman, and I discovered her on Kickstarter. She was trying to raise money to basically launch Two Books, and so I contacted her and I said, you know, I think that you would be able to expedite what you're trying to do with books if you joined us, right? And she did. And so Two Books sort of lends itself to older books for readers, okay? Children's Book Press they were the first multicultural books publisher in the United States. They were the very first. And so Children's Book Press and Shen's Books, they fell on hard times, so we were able to fold them into what it is we do, because it was a great fit, you know, in terms of diversity. Now, mentioning Children's Book Press and SHENS is a good opportunity to talk about, the diverse books that are in print already. Before I mentioned the Cooperative Children's Book Center statistics on new diverse books that are published each year, but what about the books that are already in print? Now, the thing is, if Children's Book Press and SHENS essentially cease to exist, that would be a large amount of diverse books that essentially would not be available for kids to read. So I think it's important to sort of keep your eye on the books that are out there already. So when the age of social media happened, I would say personal blogs came up onto the scene around '96. Corporate blogs followed in 2000. Facebook was created in 2004. Twitter was created in 2006. So we began to get more active online, right? And so we started a blog, but it took many years for us to figure out what to talk about online, right? And so then we started this series called The Diversity Gap, and we began to look at different things a little more in depth. And we started with children's books. Again, Cooperative Children's Book Center data has been out there for years. And we took it and we put it in an infographic, right? And so infographics are, they're essentially these graphics that allow you to take complex data sets and then make them completely understandable at a glance, because they're so easy to read. So the Cooperative Children's Book Center data had been out there for years, but then when we put it in the infographic, there were people who were, very, very familiar with this information, but were actually shocked to see it displayed this way and over so many years. They didn't think that the situation was this bad. And so let's see, where am I? Okay. So we started that online. And then around the time that we launched 2 books, again, re-upping on the mission, right? We started the New Visions Award. And this was, or is, an award for unpublished authors of middle grade and YA novels, right? And they have to be people of color again. So 2 books also brought a sense of fun, to our line, because, there's always that complaint that diverse books are dry and they're not a lot of fun and it's like eating your broccoli, but it's more like, but 2 books was able to sort of bring a sense of adventure, a sense of, thrilling action, and so with this book here, Killer of Enemies, it's written by the Native American storyteller Joseph Bruchac, right? And so what these books allowed us to do was come up with very quick one-liners of summing up what the books are about. So for Killer of Enemies, it's an Apache post-apocalyptic steampunk thriller. Pretty fun, right? So then Ink and Ashes, it's Veronica Mars meets the Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia, okay? And then Yummy. Yummy is our first graphic novel, and it is essentially, who here likes comic books? All right, yeah, I'm a huge comic book fan. I just really admire how the format allows you to tell complex stories through sequential artwork. So rather than tell you anything about Yummy, I'm going to play this book trailer for you, and it'll essentially tell you what it's about.
They called him Little Yummy cause he liked to eat candy. He lived with his granny, but the streets was his family. By him being young, he was easy to control. He ain't know any better, so he did what he was told. Like drive-bys, walk up to a guy, ask him what he claiming, wrong answer and he died. And Shorty was only 11, but he posted up on 107. Yeah, a story about a young boy, black in the ghetto. No matter what he does, it's back to the ghetto. No choice but to adapt to the ghetto, so he adapts to the ghetto. The crack in the mellow. Yummy guys told him get up in the ride, and when they drove, they saw a lot of people outside. They told Yummy to shoot up in the crowd, and when he did, he ended up killing a child. Wow, now the cops trying to catch him. And his guys think he can't handle the pressure. Derek and Craig found him. They took him to a Vidoc. Told him he was going out of town to a nice spot. But they really wanted him actually dead. So they put a bullet in the back of his head. Now the cops, they looking for the thugs. Only thing was left for Yummy was his mugshot picture. Too young to die, too young to kill.
So our next graphic novel will actually be coming out next year, and I believe that it's going to be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than what you just saw for Yummy. So we're really looking forward to that. So our online presence continued to grow, and when I mentioned the diversity gap studies, we began to branch out into other areas. TV, film, theater, New York Times bestseller lists, politics, and the tech industry. So when we looked at, for instance, the Emmy Awards, did you know last year that Viola Davis was the first woman of color to win an Emmy for a drama in the whole history of the Emmys? And then when we looked at the Academy Awards in film, in the 87 years of the Academy Awards history, only one person of color has won the Oscar for Best Actress, and who was that? Halle Berry, right? 2002, in 87 years. It's amazing, right? So we began to look at these different industries, and we saw, that there was a lot of, connections being made, of seeing the same thing happening over and over again in different industries. And so these systemic problems that we were seeing was, it wasn't one of those, we were letting our readers know that publishing was not the only industry that was facing these things. Now, I don't think the diversity gap provides all the answers, but I do think that it's asking the right questions. So our diversity gap on the tech field, which you see in the lower left-hand corner, that was the one that essentially inspired us to run a diversity staff survey of our own. And so that, we released it at the beginning of this year, and it's called the Diversity Baseline Survey. And so what that is it's essentially, it was taking a look at staffing, at publishing and reviewers, right? And what the diversity looked like behind the scenes. Now, mostly up until this point, most of the feeling about the diversity in publishing behind the scenes was anecdotal. People knew we had a problem, but they didn't really know how bad it was, and there was certainly no data to really look at. So when we launched this, we wanted to sort of establish a baseline number that essentially would act as something that would be able to measure progress against, whether it's getting better, staying the same, or getting worse. So from an industry overall, you could see that 79% of publishing staff is white, 78% is women, 88% is straight, and 92% is non-disabled, right? And so all in all, when all was said and done, we had about 34 publishers participate and 8 major reviewers. 3 out of the 5 big five publishers participated in the survey. And we were really trying to make sure that there was a nice mix of small, medium, and large publishers, when we could sort of have a very even, viewpoint of what to look at. So in the editorial department, there's 82% white, 84% female, 86% straight, and 92% non-disabled. So The interesting part of the survey, I felt, was when we began to look at departments, right? And we looked at the executive level jobs, we looked at the editorial department, we looked at sales, we looked at marketing, and we also looked at book reviewers, right? And the reason that we singled out these particular departments, because we consider these departments, you know, gatekeepers. These are essentially the departments that have the responsibility to not only shape, you know, what the books are, the main product that we sell, but also the people who sell them, the people who market them, and book reviewers who are basically the taste makers. They're telling you what to read and what not to read. And so you can see that the diversity is a little less so with book reviewers, and 89% are white, 87% are women, 91% straight, and 88% non-disabled. So when we sent the survey out, 1,524 reviewers were surveyed, 11,713 publishing employees were surveyed, which comes out to a total of 13,237 surveys. The response rate was about 26%. So I think what may be at work here is a phenomenon known as cultural fit. Cultural fit is defined as the tendency, conscious or unconscious, for executives, editors, marketers, salespeople, reviewers to work with, develop, and recommend books by and about people who look like them. And I think cultural fit relates to corporate culture, and it definitely has something to do with hiring, okay? So, you know, just to illustrate, you know, how this relates to Lee and Low Books, you know, how do our numbers look in terms of, you know, staff diversity? So you can see that 69% of the people who work at Lee and Low Books are people of color. If we were to drill down to the departments, we have 50% of people in editorial are people of color. In marketing, we have 75% of people are people of color. Sales is 50%, operations 100%. And we have fluent Spanish speakers in editorial, marketing, publicity, and sales. And so then you might be interested in how the author and illustrator mix looks like. And so 68% of Lee and Low's authors and illustrators are people of color. So what happens next? You know, we have all this data. I mean, what do we do next? And so one thing that we decided to do from looking at this data was we partnered with Simmons College, because we noticed that a lot of people who go into publishing, who become reviewers, actually have advanced degrees. So what this partnership with Simmons does, we set up a $100,000 scholarship to help people of color who are going for those degrees, who are destined to enter publishing, you know, help them a little bit with that financial obstacle of getting those advanced degrees. We also have an internship that we've been running for years, but a couple of years back we switched it to an internship for students of color, you know, and it's a paid internship, so then, you know, students who, you know, can't afford to do unpaid internships wouldn't have that problem serving in an internship with us. Now, when Lee and Low started, we could do very little outside of the very basics. You know, we could publish our books, we could send them out for review, but we could do little else aside from that. 25 years later, we're able to do more to influence the big picture of publishing, okay? So doing more takes many, many forms. As readers, doing more could be just the act of buying a book. They say that buying a book can be a political act. Well, choosing to buy or read diverse books is a conscious decision. Now, while inequality and the lack of representation in books may seem insurmountable, it is a problem like no other. So, since I'm a business owner, I look at things, I look at problems in a certain way. So if a problem exists, the problem must be studied, understood, resources allocated, goals set, solutions tried, failures analyzed, and then more solutions tried. It's essentially a process of rinse, wash, and repeat. Okay? So authors like Kwame, Ellen, Jackie, everyone who basically organized this day for us, they're doing more. Companies like Lee and Low and the other publishers participating today are doing more. And in our world of instant gratification, on-demand, basically ability, it's really tough, because doing more isn't easy, okay? What time of the day is left in your day after you've got done binge watching the whole second season of Daredevil, But I want to end with a quote from a commencement speech that Congressman John Lewis gave last week, as he recounted his days being a freedom rider in the 1960s. And Congressman Lewis is quoted as saying, "We didn't give up, we didn't give in, we didn't lose faith. We kept our eyes on the prize." Thank you.
So we have about 11 minutes for questions, and so you got to ask yourself, why was that important? Writing is a job. This is an industry you want to be a part of. This is work, and so it's important for you to know how the industry works, the background of it, from multiple perspectives. And so you got a lot of information, a lot of things happen, and I hope you wrote down things like Simmons College. And when you research what their involvement is in the children's literature industry, some of you may say, well, this is a path I may want to go down. You heard about some of the imprints. And that reminded me that maybe everyone doesn't know what an imprint is. And you may be too shy to ask that kind of question. No question is silly enough. If you don't want to ask it, write it down. Hand it to me when I'm walking down the aisles. All right? But there were a lot of things that Jason shared. So let's get into questions. Yes. I'm sorry, we have two people holding mics, so hold up your hand, and then they will hold it up high. They will bring a mic around to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll start with a basic question. You mentioned getting to Lee and Low through a contest. What are the ways to get your work to a publisher like Lee and Low? Is it agents? What's the best way?
Well, we basically, in terms of manuscripts, we accept manuscripts that are unagented, unsolicited. We feel that really, in order to work with people who have never, worked in publishing before, not everyone is going to have an agent out of the gate, so it's kind of silly to sort of require that. So, yeah, we have a whole page. It's called Writers and Illustrators on our website, and if you go to, the writing guidelines, it has all, the information for approaching us with new work. I'd also like to say that if you ask a question, the first 6 people will receive a free book. So come and get your free book.
We had a question over here.
Hi, my name is Morgan Vinzant, and I'm an aspiring bestseller for children's books. I wanted to know, for people who are self-publishing, what is the best route for distribution? Because with the larger distribution companies, they don't talk to you unless you have multiple titles under your name.
I mean, the self-publishing sort of industry is interesting, because what it points to is that basically you're taking on the task of being a small publisher of one. Of that one bestseller that you're going to do. So you really have to be comfortable if you're going to go this route, to do it all, really. Kind of what when I showed you the Leatherman, you got to do all those roles, And I'm not sure about when in the early days we were handled by a distributor called Publishers Group West. But I'm not sure if they take on self-published books, I mean, you may try them, because I do remember when I walked past their booth at one of the shows that sometimes they would have an author there, and she only would have like 3 books or something like that. So I think that they may have decided to take that on, so you might check that out. Yeah. Oh, you asked a question, so here you go.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Akanke. My question was similar to hers. If someone wanted to start a small publishing company, how do you get distribution and how do you get your books reviewed?
Yeah, I mean, we only work with the one distributor, so I can only speak to that. But it really is sort of like you're trying out, for the team, And so, once you had, some books, you would go and you would send them, or you'd find the contact to send them to them, and then they would decide whether to take you on. There's a number of distributors out there, and so I think you'd have to make the rounds, and hopefully find a good fit.
And just to add on to that, because those are very good questions.
Yeah.
And go ahead, say your thing.
Oh, no, I was just...
The book. You got to get the book. Distribution in this day and age is, there's a great equalizer out there for self-published authors that allows you to get your books directly to the customer without dealing with wholesale and distribution discounts. That's called the internet, people. Use the internet, use social media. To get your books out there, you, in effect, can become the distributor for your titles. So let's start there first. Let's figure out how we're going to sell our titles, sell our books. Now, as Jason mentioned, the largest wholesaler and I guess distributor in the world for trade is Ingram. And so they have a program for small presses and for self-published authors that will get your books to retail and libraries and schools. So check out Ingram. But yeah, you all distribute, get your books out there. That's most important. Right here.
Thank you. So with the rise of Amazon in the role of publishing and the fact that Barnes & Noble is the only major bookstore out there, and it now has half the shelf space that it used to, and with the rise of self-publishing, what is the future of the publishing industry for corporate houses, independent houses? Is it a shrinking field, or how can they navigate these changes as there are more and more alternatives or more giants?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I really do feel that publishing is long overdue for a little bit of an overhaul in terms of reimagining how to do business. Because, as you can tell from when I was talking about Amazon, I'm not a big fan, right? And I don't like sort of my terms being dictated, by someone who's not willing to, have a win-win, arrangement. It's basically, this is what we're doing, it's our way or the highway, right? And that's not a way to do business. So I think that the internet can work both ways, where technology can work against you, it can also work for you, So I think that, in terms of independent publishers, they may have to go out on their own, develop, e-commerce, that basically works and isn't just some pretty website that essentially is is a glorified catalog, Basically learn e-commerce, get in there and make it work, So I think publishing has to sort of pull itself up, by its own bootstraps, and maybe the old models are outdated and they have to be reformed, So I think that, publishers have to act like the scrappy startups that they were a long time ago, and really think outside the box and, get this business going. Because I think books are amazing. I think books are an incredible product that hasn't really lost any of its allure. But the selling channel needs work, though, okay? And publishers, if they're gonna say, hey, we're gonna take your book, we're gonna get it out there, then they gotta do a much better job of doing that, and can't be beholden to, the big gorilla in the room or whatever, So I hope that answers some of your question.
Hello, my name is Keisha Jones, as you can see earlier. Have there been situations where a self-publisher was so successful that a publishing company wanted to publish their product? Sure. Has something like that occurred with your company?
It hasn't happened with us, but there have been some stories of books that have been self-published and become huge, you know. What was that book that was, yeah, Aragon is a good example of that. I mean, there's some, you know, where the person, they got rejected 1,000 times. They said, I'm going to do it on my own. All of a sudden, they were selling, you know, books hand over fist. And so then a publisher got wind of that, basically took that book, you know, and made it their own, or, you know, help them distribute it even more. So yes, that does happen. Yeah.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you two examples. One, some of you, y'all are pretty young though, so y'all may not remember, but there was this writer named E. Lynn Harris. Remember that? And E. Lynn Harris wrote novels featuring characters that were gay. And he self-published these characters. Invisible Life was his first one. And he ended up becoming a huge #1 New York Times bestseller, and I forgot which publisher he was with. But more recently, 50 Shades of Grey, and those were ebooks that she published. So it's very common. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let's make it good right here, make it good.
It looks like you're out of books, but I still have a question. So my name is Lisa Yearwood, another best-selling author, soon, one day. I wanted to know, in this culture where we have a push towards brief clips type of reading, what do you see as the future of reading in general? Do you have hope? Do you see new ways? I see that you had the clip for the book, and that kind of reaches a new audience and draws them in. But there used to be kind of this death knell for reading, and I was wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what day you talk to me. I mean, as I said, I have great faith in, you know, books in general. You know, I still think they're great. But, I mean, one cannot, you know, bury your head in the sand and basically not look at the way the world is. I mean, there's just, you know, there's an amazing amount of alternative entertainment out there, you know. I mean, from binge watching, they certainly didn't have that when I was growing up, you know, to, you know, just, I mean, when I walk down the aisle and I'm on my commuter train in the morning and everybody is glued to their devices, there aren't a lot of people who are reading print books, you know, and so, you know, I'm not like looking over people's shoulder and seeing what they're doing on their devices. Are they reading, you know, maybe on their devices? So essentially that points to ebooks, you know, but I mean, I can speak personally from, you know, ebook sales that essentially that's not happening for children, right? Maybe it's happening for adult, but not so much for children. So for us, it's still paper books. It's still books, you know, that you can hold in your hand, you know, and have that, you know, tactile experience. So I'm hopeful, you know, because, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, I'm a pretty smart guy and I might be able to come up with something for us, but I'm hoping that, you know, this industry is also filled with smart folks as well, and that, you know, if they want to see books around, they're going to have to get innovative, you know, think of new ways to sell them. So it's a bit of a dodge, that answer, you know, but I don't have all the answers, though, is what it really comes down to.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Lowe. Thank you, man. Thank you. So when we recap sort of that experience, what we learned is that we need to know this business. Jason knows this business. He's known it for 25 plus years. And you want to be in this world of changing the lives of children, you got to learn the business. You have to know the ins and outs. And so it's important. The Crossover, which was written over the course of 5 years, was a novel that had been rejected quite a bit by publishers, which is nothing new. The writers who are published in this room will tell you rejection is a part of the game. It had been rejected quite a bit. And I guess through a little bit of perseverance, I stuck to it and eventually was rewarded with this phenomenal, life-changing honor, the Newbery Medal. As it happens, yeah, feel free to clap. As it happens, there are 14 members of a committee that decide which book will be the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children that year. And one of those 14 members is here today, who is responsible for ultimately changing my writerly life. Jennifer Brown is the vice president and publisher at Alfred Knopf Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Random House. Now, if you all know, again, this goes back to knowing the business and knowing the history. Alfred Knopf and Blanche Knopf published what famous black bard of Harlem? Come on, Ruth, they don't know Langston Hughes? They don't know Langston Hughes around? Jennifer is a former children's editor of Shelf Awareness, the director of the Children's Literature Center at Bank Street. She served as a children's review editor for Publishers Weekly for 10 years. She has served on numerous industry committees, including the 2014 John Newbery Medal Committee. Prior to Publishers Weekly, she was a children's book editor at HarperCollins and an elementary school teacher, grades K to 2. I invited her here because, like Jason, she's in publishing, but from a different perspective. And I want you all to be equipped with all of it. Please welcome my friend Jennifer Brown.
Good morning. So, I just need to start by saying I've been thinking a lot about what happened in Orlando, and I keep thinking, what if that shooter had had an opportunity to read a story that would change his mind? You know, it's in the midst of that sadness, I think all of us mourning what happened there, we had a celebration of Hamilton, which is such an extraordinary feat of theater and story and revealing the complexity of the men who helped form this nation. We're sitting in the room of one of their, Thomas Jefferson's library. So I think we're here to have a really interesting conversation about the many voices that we need to hear. So without further ado, there are so many books, and the question for me is, how do we get certain ones to stand out? So I'm going to talk to you today as aspiring writers, but also as people we need in the publishing industry. And I'm going to try to collect some of the voices that I've heard through my career, which is rather long, and just let you know how many different possibilities there are for you. Some background about me as a reader. These are the books I grew up with. My brother, who's 4 years younger than I am, and I were members of the I Can Read book club. I read aloud to him. When I taught, I read aloud to my students even after they could read independently, and my husband and I still read aloud to each other. I cannot stress enough the importance of reading aloud. And these are the books I grew up with in Kalamazoo, Michigan. In first grade, I saw the movie Oliver with Mark Lester, Jack Wilde, and Ron Moody. In third grade, I played Fanny, Scrooge's little sister in A Christmas Carol. I wound up writing my junior paper in college about the orphan figure in Dickens. You can see that my obsessions are lifelong. So I'm going to go through a lot here, so if you have questions at the end, that'll be great. I'm just going to speed through. I fell in love with James Joyce when I read A Portrait of the Artist as a young man. I fell in love with this book because of what it taught me about Irish history and politics through the fights around Stephen Dedalus' dinner table. I was thrilled to discover that Ulysses began as a short story in Dubliners. I never read Finnegan's Wake. So what's an English major to do? That's what I did. I majored in English. I was bent on avoiding the profession everybody told me I had to go into, which was teaching, though I did end up teaching. I read Maxwell Perkins, editor of Genius, and I saw that he got to work with many of my favorite authors, so I decided that's what I would do. I would move to New York and be just like Dickens. I'm sorry, Perkins. But when I went to what was then Harper & Row to interview for a job as an adult trade editor, the head of HR said, "Everyone thinks they want to be an adult trade editor, but you haven't met Bill Morris." That's Bill. He was the director of library promotion for Harper Children's Books. At conferences, you are more likely to see him looking like this. This is Bill with Jean Craighead George, who wrote Julie of the Wolves and My Side of the Mountain. And that's me with Trev Jones on the left. Oh, I'm just speeding through here. I don't know what happened. Okay. That's me with Bill right out of college, and that's Trev Jones in the pink blazer. She was the children's reviews editor at School Library Journal. Bill was my mentor until he died in 2003. He introduced me to the most wonderful people in publishing, and he was an avid reader. His favorite book was Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. He taught me everything about Harper's rich history. This is briefly my circuitous route, and I'm posting this here because you can never make a mistake. That's my view. Every choice I made led to something interesting. So I started out, as I said, in marketing, and then an editorial assistant at Harper. Then I left to teach K through 12, but I continued reading manuscripts at Harper and also worked on the annotated catalog, which is the backlist catalog, which means anything that was published more than a year ago. So I went back into that in the summer with Bill. Then I was offered a job as a head teacher, and Bill intervened and said, "We need an educational marketing manager." And that was at a time when whole language was taking off. I don't know how many of you remember that, but that was when teachers were starting to use trade books instead of textbooks. And I thought, wow, I'd get to see what the whole country was doing, what their approach was. And we had so many wonderful books at Harper that I thought this would be an opportunity to really find out what was happening. Then I became the reviews editor at first SLJ as a freelancer with Trev Jones, who you saw, and also at PW. And I ended up staying at PW for 10 years and then moving to Shelf Awareness. And while I did my work at Shelf Awareness, I also was volunteering at the Bank Street Children's Book Committee. And that ended up evolving into the director of the Center of Children's Literature there. And now I'm publishing director at Knopf. Why did I chart this as a circle? Because you will soon see how this is all connected. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. Okay. Do you know how early a child learns to complete that sentence? As soon as they can form words. That's what I discovered when Dr. Perry Class came to speak at Bank Street. Think about the power of that a phrase of yours could be one that a child holds close through his or her whole life. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Whether or not you are a believer, this is a powerful idea, that from the Word comes a world. As a writer, that is what you do. You create a world with words. What you want to do is invite young readers into your world with those very first words. Where's Papa going with that axe? Does anybody know what that's from? Very good. We know by the end of that first paragraph that Fern is going to rescue this little pig that's going to turn out to be Wilbur. Good thing the plane had seat belts and we'd been strapped in tight before takeoff. Without them, that last jolt would have been enough to throw Vanetta into orbit and Fern across the aisle. Still, I anchored myself and my sisters best as I could to brace us for whatever came next. Those clouds weren't through with us yet and dealt another Cassius Clay left and a right jab to the body of our Boeing 727. That's the opening to One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia. Right away, you wonder, where are they going? Why are these three sisters traveling alone? And Delphina's mention of Cassius Clay places us in a historical era and hints at the civil rights movement that's going to be the setting for the entire novel. My name is India Opal Baloney, and last summer my daddy, the preacher, sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice, and 2 tomatoes, and I came back with a dog. Now, if you go to the Curlin collection at the University of Minnesota, you will discover just how many drafts it took Kate DiCamillo to come up with that first sentence. Walter Dean Meyer's papers are there also, and there are several other wonderful institutions that have those kinds of papers available. Some of them are online, so if you want to see me after, we can talk about how you can research some of those things, because they're really instructive. I just put John Class, since I want my hat back here, as a way of thinking about format, because he does something really interesting here. There's no word wasted. He doesn't say he said, she said. He shows you by the color of the type who's talking. And one of the wonderful things is the bear is looking for his hat, and he's asking a variety of animals, and no one's helping him. So he finally says, thank you anyway. And what happens when you read it aloud with children is they start going, thank you anyway, and they make it into this little musical refrain. It's uncanny, no matter who you read it to, how many classes, what age, they all do that. I love showing this book because A Hole is to Dig is by Ruth Krauss. She wrote it, and Maurice Sendak illustrated it. She picked him, which never happened in the 1930s. She was a member of the Writers' Lab along with Margaret Wise Brown, Crockett Johnson, which was Ruth Krauss's husband, who wrote Harold and the Purple Crayon, and they all invented this children's literature for very young children. At that time, there was very little being published for young children, and certainly not the way they talked about the world or saw it. So I'm just going to show you a couple spreads here. A face is so you can make faces. Rugs are so dogs have napkins. A hole is for a mouse to live in. Ruth Krauss used to say, the story, she actually published at Harper, and the legend was that she thought she would be sued by one of her former students because she basically just wrote down everything they said. The sun is to tell you when it's every day. I just love these. You can just pour over them. Okay, I wanted to touch on information books because this is a really booming area as well. And what I love about this book is that Lissa Sweet takes you into Tony Sarg, who is very approachable. He created the balloons over Broadway, the Thanksgiving Day Parade balloons. But he started as a puppeteer and a toy maker, and you can see Melissa's notes here. And most authors and artists do give you a window into their process if you go into their website. And I just think that she's such a wonderful resource. Her journal pages look just like her books. How many jelly beans I have here because Andrea Menotti was trying to explain to her children how math works, and she couldn't find anything to explain it. So she wrote this book. And in his acceptance speech, Yancey Labatt, who is the artist for this, thanked his publisher for creating a special casing to house this fold-out, which shows actually 1 million jelly beans. And if later I can tell you how he did that, but I just love kids being able to actually see what 1 million looks like. The Cook Prize is a prize that Bank Street came up with to encourage the publication of STEM books, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I wanted to mention this in the Irma Black Award because the Irma Black Award is for a book that works together with both words and pictures. And both of these prizes are selected by children. You can register online, and you find out what the 4 finalists are, and you get an opportunity to have all the children voting. And I included Moonshot because Brian Floca took 10 years to write it. He uses the end papers for a lot of the information he wasn't able to fit into the book. And he is another who shares his research, his sketch stages, before his final art. We Are America. This is one of my favorite books, and I think it's so timely right now. This was a book that Walter Dean Myers wrote in response to 9/11. He thought, I was one of those people who was critical of my country, and I wanted to look again at why I live here and why I love it. I'm gonna get emotional, okay. So, and his son, Christopher Myers, who's on the left, did the artwork for it and did a huge amount of research himself. And they showcase individuals who I hadn't known about in history in these giant murals, which are then printed in this very nice oversized book, but it doesn't do justice to the beautiful murals. And again, Walter draws from the founding fathers in these documents, and it just gives you that sense of complexity of who these men were and what they were struggling with. This was a juxtaposition that I loved. It's the Mayflower on the left and present-day refugees on the right. And that is a theme that goes on through the book and really plays up the importance of this country's immigrants and the people who were here before we came. We were there too. I have this here because Philip Hoos discovered Claudette Colvin's story when he was doing the research for We Were There Too, which was about young people who made a difference. And he tried for years to get Claudette Colvin to do her full story. She was 14 years old when she refused to excuse me. She was 14 years old when she refused to stand up on a Montgomery, Alabama bus, 9 months before Rosa Parks. And her story is very complicated. This book is extraordinary, and she only agreed to an interview with him after she retired, and it'll become clear why. But the two of them toured together to promote this book, and it's extremely moving. To me, it was a story of persistence and trust and partnership. And I have Gene Luen Yang here because he's going to come up in a few minutes again. But Boxers and Saints is an extraordinary way to look at the Boxer Rebellion from both sides. And by the end, you feel like they both really had a reason for fighting. And that's the beauty of what Gene Lang does here. There are even panels that are identical in both books, but you get to see the perspective of each narrator. So you really get a sense of just how complicated the situation was. I'm just touching on beginning readers. It was really interesting to me that these began both at Random House and at Harper and Row in 1957. So there was this kind of bubbling up of necessity to have books for children who wanted to read independently. And I have these two here just to give you a sense of how, again, how format is changing. I feel like there's so much more we can do now with printing and online, so you can really see what form your story needs to take. I love what Mo Willems does with panels. Who would have thought of panels for beginning readers? And Françoise Mouly did something very similar with her Toon books. Françoise is the art director for The New Yorker, and she also developed Raw Magazine with her husband, Art Spiegelman. So they, too, are using cartoon panels to teach children how to read. Kevin Henkes is one of my favorite writers. He started when he was 19. He did a series of books called Penny, and with each book, her world gets a little bigger. I have him here because he also writes for very young children, Wemberly Worried being one of them. Lily's Purple Plastic Purse is for the newly independent child, and Year of Billy Miller is a novel. And I'm going to talk about a few other authors who run the gamut. Pam Munoz Ryan, her biography of Marian Anderson. Echo, which is her most recent, gorgeous book, 3 different perspectives that come together. Esperanza Rising, which is kind of her family story. Kwame Alexander, Acoustic Rooster and His Barnyard Band, picture book, yay! Crossover, fabulous middle grade novel, and He Said, She Said, which is his YA. We mentioned the same one, see that? Grace Lynn, she does Ugly Vegetables is a board book. Ling and Ting is a beginning reader, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon is her Newbery Honor middle grade book. So these are just some, I think it really helps sometimes to think about author studies and what your format can be. Jacqueline Woodson, obviously. Each Kindness, which is this wonderfully open-ended story where it just leaves both the narrator and the reader thinking about what could have been done differently. Showay, her gorgeous Newbery Honor book, and of course her memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming in Poetry. Marilyn Nelson is another poet I adore. Beautiful Ballerina, very simple picture book. How I Discovered Poetry is her memoir, Becoming a Poet, and Emmett Till should have won the Pulitzer Prize, in my view. And Walter was one of the first people I met in publishing, and he just never stopped. I mean, he was always researching. Every time he went to a new town, he would go to the antique stores and look for books. And he started collecting old photographs, and that became Brown Angels. He also discovered the story behind At Her Majesty's Request in one of those antique stores as well. And again, Monster broke every format. He created a genre with this, I think. The idea of a script, to my knowledge, I can't think of another one that came before that. I wanted to mention Neil Gaiman because I think he does something that's really instructive for writers, which is he tweets all day long. I don't know how many of you follow him. And then he crafts a blog at the end of the day that's primarily composed of his tweets. And it helps me think about how we can use our writing and our thinking throughout the day to reflect. So I just wanted to mention that if any of you have a chance. Okay. So I have my circuitous route. I've gotten way away from my notes because I'm just trying to speed through. Let's see. So basically, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the people I've met in my travels and some of the things that they had to say about publishing. And also to talk about how, I only saw a few hands, I think, when I looked around, of those of you who wanted to go into publishing, but it's such a great way to learn the inside if you want to write. And I'm just going to single out Maya Motain, who's back here. Maya started as our intern last fall, and at Knopf, and now she's a full-time editorial member of Random House. So Maya is one of those people with a double life who you're going to hear more of in a moment. So, sorry, I've lost my notes. So this is Calvin Reid. Calvin, when I got to PW, oh gosh, it was probably 2005, he was the only person talking about comics. And he was the only person talking about ebooks. And I said, Calvin, how did you get into publishing? And he said, well, I came to be an artist, and I got a job at Library Journal. But Calvin is really such a generous human being. When American-Born Chinese landed on my desk at Publishers Weekly when I was the children's editor, I didn't know what to do with it. Calvin said, you need to review this. This is a children's book. And I said, I wouldn't know how to evaluate it, Calvin. So he reviewed it in his comics column. But then he proceeded to teach me everything he knew about comics: pacing, color, the use of kind of telescoping in and then coming back out. He was so generous. And he said when he joined PW during an alternative comics movement, and indie presses like Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly were just starting superhero comics. And he knew that PW was the perfect vehicle to make the case. Kwame talked about children's books as activism. And we talked a little bit about what might have happened. How would people behave differently if they had the compassion of a children's book that made a difference? And I think what Calvin did was decide, this is the way I'm going to be able to get comics out in the world. Phoebe Ye, who's also very involved in this We Need Diverse Books movement, was introduced to publishing through Jane Yolen, who is an author and who also taught at her college. John Adamo, our director of marketing, loved music and publishing, and he ended up going into publishing, but he still plays in a band. This is James Perry on the left, Ken Kong on the right. James said he always was read to as a child, and he wanted to go into publishing because he felt it would make a difference in the world. And Ken, I always like to tell stories like this. Ken began as a temp in the legal department at Golden Books. And when Golden Books was acquired by Random House, he stayed, and he's just gone up and up, and he's now one of our finance business managers. Ellie Bieber wanted to come into publishing because of how creative it was. Lisa Clark, this was my favorite. She said, a senior executive I admired said, figure out what makes your heart sing and follow that path. She's head of our HR division, and she treats everyone as if it's a problem-solving situation. She knows that she can work it all out, and I think she's so committed to children's books. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a little, just tiny bit of advice here. Adam Silvera, some of you may know him. He wrote a book called More Happy Than Not. He approached me at the Penn Writers' Voices program, and he said, I'd really like to review children's books. I work at Barnes & Noble. And I said, well, send me some reviews, and I'd be happy to look at them. He was an excellent writer, obviously, and he started reviewing for Shelf Awareness. He also ended up being events manager at Books of Wonder, which is a small independent children's bookstore in New York. So my advice is to get into your local bookstore, offer to write shelf talkers, see if they need help shelving. Maybe there's a way you can help with events. Go to your local library, see if there are opportunities there. These are the people who really know children's books, and if you want to learn a lot about who's coming up, who's coming in, to actually see writers speak, these are wonderful resources. E.B. Lewis told a story once of just trying to break into children's books and going every day at lunchtime when he was on break and, and asking his local bookseller to walk him through her favorite books. The other is to volunteer. As I mentioned, I volunteered at the Children's Book Committee at Bank Street, and that ended up turning into a 3-day-a-week job. And I think there's so many ways to get involved if you want to get involved. There's also SCBWI. How many of you know about that? Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. They have conferences all around the country. They have a newsletter that helps with copyright information and who are the new agents who might be looking for new clients. And you can work at their local conferences and get involved. They also have one-on-one manuscript critiques. You pay a little bit more, but it's really worth it. And the other thing is literary agents. Many of them are based all around the country, but even if you aren't near one, you could offer to critique manuscripts for them from afar, and sometimes that's how, it's certainly the person who's the hub of our department now started, and she also worked at Algonquin as a volunteer while she was at North Carolina. So I think I'm just going to turn it over now. Thank you very much.
Publishers Weekly, shelf awareness, writing shelf talkers. Some of this stuff may sound like you have no idea what she's saying, what she's talking about. Some of you already know, but those are key things. And so you're taking these notes. A master class is where students come to learn from an expert. So some of the stuff you may not know, but the experts know it. So write that stuff down. The other thing we learned that was really major here is the importance of knowing people and sort of being around and surrounding yourself with people in the industry. We don't like to often say it, but people hook people up when they know you and when they like you. Am I right? That's how it happens. If I like you, yeah. If I don't know you, then I don't know you. I can't know what I don't know. My dad likes to say that. What does that mean? And so here's my example, my experience. 2008, I got invited to a party at Scholastic by a friend of mine. I didn't know anybody at Scholastic. But I said, my wife's like, you got to go to the party, Kwame. You got to be in the room where it happens. I go to the party. It's in the penthouse, Scholastic, 11th floor or whatever floor it is. I'm walking around. I'm like, yeah, hey. I'm Kwame Alexander. I've written some love poems, I've done my thing. And I don't really know why I'm there, but I'm just there. And so somebody introduces me to Lois Bridges. Lois Bridges works for Scholastic Professional, which is the educational side. They're publishing teacher resources. And so we hit it off, we talked, and then I'm out. That was 2008. It's now 2016. Scholastic, 8 years later, just published my professional kit, book, videos, the whole nine. And who was the publisher? Lois Bridges. 8 years ago, I met her, and I'm just this dude who's writing poems. And now I'm like one of her major authors. You all were in the room with Jennifer Brown. How often are you in the room with the publisher of Alfred Knopf books for young readers? That just doesn't happen. People would crave. And so I'm not saying bum rush her with your manuscripts, but I'm saying keep that in mind. Speaking of Scholastic, Cassandra Pelham grew up in Delaware and graduated from Spelman, y'all. She is a senior editor for the Graphics and Scholastic Press imprints at Scholastic and has edited award-winning #1 New York Times best-selling books like Smile. Which is another thing about Jennifer's presentation, is that she mentioned so many books. You gotta read these books. Cassandra spends her time enjoying the arts, hanging out in Brooklyn, and just pretty much being awesome and fabulous. Y'all give it up for Cassandra Pelham.
Good morning. I want to thank Kwame Alexander, Jacqueline Woodson, and We Need Diverse Books for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and the Library of Congress for hosting us. This is my first time here, and I am simply elated. Inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're at the Library of Congress right now. But I will try to keep it together for the next 20 or so minutes. I can't make any promises beyond that. I'm here today to talk a bit about my journey in publishing. My parents are really academically oriented, and between them, they have 7 undergraduate and graduate degrees. This means I was raised in a home filled with books. Books on shelves, books stacked in piles on every available surface, books in overflowing boxes. They were mostly books about God, the Black experience, psychology, finance, and my dad's fraternity. All topics that I can now get into, but when I was a kid, I found them to be extraordinarily boring. It was my older brother's room that held the jackpot, fiction. He had all of the good stuff, the classics, and I tore through his books along with my own. So I was that 10-year-old kid whose favorite books were Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor and East of Eden by John Steinbeck. My brother is 6 years older than me. We're very close, and it was he who taught me to read books without pictures using Hatchet by Gary Paulson. From then on, you couldn't keep me away from books. I loved living in imagined worlds. So that's what I did, until I enrolled at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, as a childhood development major with a minor in creative writing. I had the intention of eventually working with kids in some capacity and writing. So a semester passed, and I realized something was missing. I wasn't reading as much as I used to, and I wasn't feeling as passionate about my studies as I knew I could. I wanted to explore literature and the history of the written word in a way I hadn't previously. So I switched to an English major and dropped the creative writing minor, because I also realized that I liked writing a lot more when I did it on my own time and in my own time. At Spelman, I read books by writers I had never been exposed to before because I was rarely assigned books by writers of color in grade school. Alice Walker, Gwendolyn Brooks, James Baldwin, Julia Alvarez, Octavia Butler, Tsitsi Dangarembga. The list goes on. This was a whole new kind of education. My mind was thoroughly blown and I was in heaven. Spelman is where I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi for the first time, a book that changed my life and would inform my career later on. As I neared the end of my sophomore year, I still was not sure of what I would actually do with an English degree. I often ask myself, what do people do with English degrees? Yes, reading books, writing papers about books, and talking about books is all quite lovely, but I knew I couldn't live in my little literary, non-revenue generating world forever. People would often ask me if I planned to be a teacher or go to law school. My answer was always no, and no thank you. With this complete lack of clarity on my own life, I started to look for a summer job. I very much wanted to do something meaningful, something that would actually mean something to me, and do all the studying I had done so far justice. I did not just want to go back to half-heartedly selling Cutco knives out of my parents' house in Delaware, like I had the summer before. Spelman has an office of career planning and development, and one day I spent hours there browsing their entire catalog of internship brochures and applications. I looked at every single piece of paper in every single filing cabinet and found a few things that I thought I could do, but nothing that sounded like it would ignite a fire inside of me. Kind of dramatic, right? I was quite a vocational romantic at 19. I was feeling kind of bummed and uninspired when I spotted a pile of miscellaneous envelopes on a small table. Among them, a familiar red logo peeked out. I grabbed just that one envelope from the pile and opened it. In it were 5 applications for something called the Scholastic Children's Defense Fund Fellowship. I was immediately intrigued because, like many kids, I had grown up reading Scholastic books, and I had especially been obsessed with Scholastic Book Club flyers. I read an application, and I saw that I could apply to be a summer fellow assigned to one of a variety of departments, including editorial. Editorial. Something stirred in my spirit, and I started to get really excited because I knew that this was it. This was the meaningful summer job that I would do. Being an editor had never once crossed my mind, but sure, I had often been happy to tell my friends what was wrong with their book reports and term papers. I love to read books and think about books and write about books and talk about books, so why not? The application said the fellowship would take place at Scholastic's headquarters in New York City, and housing would be provided. So at the very least, if I got in, I could put off selling Cutco knives for another summer. So I got in, along with 4 other college students of color, because this fellowship was specifically geared toward introducing people of color to the publishing industry, with the hope that they might someday become full-time employees. I was assigned to my first choice, editorial, and was placed in Cartwheel Books, a Scholastic imprint for very young readers. That summer, I read a lot of slush, unsolicited and unagented manuscripts, wrote a lot of readers' reports, and wrote a lot of rejection letters. But I also got the opportunity to write the first draft of an early reader, and everyone I worked with was really nice. In addition to our departmental duties, the fellows had to work on a group project together. We were tasked with developing a book proposal with Dougie Fresh that would be presented at an acquisitions meeting. It was very cool, and I was like, yes, this is what editors do. They develop book proposals with the human beatbox. But it wasn't all fun, games, and sitting around coming up with clever ideas with Dougie Fresh. In addition to our departmental duties and the work we did on the group project evenings and weekends, we also had weekly mentor meetings with the program's director, Karen Proctor. During these meetings, we would discuss the articles and books that Karen had assigned to us as required reading, pieces about leadership, diversity, corporate culture, and success. And we would also talk about all our little intern drama. Because that housing I mentioned that was provided, we, the fellows who worked together so intensely on the group project and were already around each other for so many hours, we also lived together in Marymount College housing in Manhattan. This was a very intense, very different sort of bonding. I was always tired, and I struggled to find time and space to be alone. But I was working harder than I ever had up until that point. I was learning, I was growing, and I was somewhat reluctantly stretching. The 5 of us were being urged to read deep inside ourselves and bring forth every fiber of our potential, and it was hard. And while both living and working with the same small group of people could be painful at times, who knows if those of us who weren't from New York could have figured out how to be a summer intern in big, confusing, expensive New York City. Sponsored housing was essential to my participation in the program, and part of why I'm able to be here today, at the Library of Congress. And here's a fun fact. When I eventually moved to New York City permanently, I rented an apartment off the same train line I took to Scholastic every day as an intern. That's how much a part of my comfort zone that summer housing had become. It made me feel like New York was possible and manageable, both as an intern and beyond. Fortunately, in these past 10 years, I have since branched out and ridden other trains. So, I went back to school. I applied to be a Scholastic Children's Defense Fund Fellow for the summers following my junior and senior years, and I participated in the program for a total of 3 summers. The second summer, I was assigned to Arthur A. Levine Books, publisher of Harry Potter. That was the summer Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince was published. It's difficult to explain how incredible being at Scholastic for that moment was. Our group project that summer was to organize a panel discussion of diverse writers and artists that the entire company was invited to. And the third summer, our group project gave us the opportunity to travel to New Orleans. It was 1 year after Hurricane Katrina, and we were tasked with meeting with educators and librarians, and then presenting to Scholastic what we learned, along with a plan for how Scholastic could help schools and libraries still in need. At this point, I had graduated and had 3 transformative summers as a Scholastic CDF Fellow. By that time, I had decided I want to be an editor. When I thought about it, it made perfect sense. And at Scholastic, I could use my English degree, as well as invoke that abandoned early childhood development major. All I needed was to be exposed to editorial as a career path and a realistic chance at making it happen. My third summer as a fellow, I was assigned to graphics, Scholastic's graphic novel imprint, which had been established the year before, and Scholastic Press. They were in need of an editorial assistant, so at the end of my third summer, they created a position for me. I am now a senior editor for those same 2 imprints. I have a particular passion for comics and acquiring graphic novels for every reader. I have edited a number of New York Times and USA Today bestsellers, as well as Eisner Award winners. I have the pleasure of working with some of the most talented writers and cartoonists around, such as Raina Telgemeier, Kazu Kibuishi, Mike Mayhack, Jeff Smith, and Kate Messner. Professionally, these past 10 years have been incredible. I would like to say that one major essential theme of my career, which I talk about any chance I get, has been mentorship. I've had several brilliant mentors over the years, and my growth through those relationships has been at the core of my personal and professional development. But one thing I recently learned is that it's important to identify both mentors and sponsors. Mentors usually operate as sounding boards and offer guidance on an informal level. Conversations might be more personal and anecdotal. Sponsors take more of a directly professional investment in you and use their influence to market you to someone else, thereby creating or furthering an opportunity for you to move to the next level in your career. I mention this because this is something I wish I had learned early on. I want to thank you all for coming and for listening to me tell my story. While I hope it provides some insight into one way of building a career in publishing, it is only one person's story. However, it would be nice to see publishers start a widespread reinstitution of programs like the one I came through that make a point of trying to expose more college students and recent graduates of color and various socioeconomic backgrounds to the publishing industry. Just last week, 3 college students and 1 recent graduate of color began participation in what's being called the Apprentice Program at Scholastic. It's a variation of the Scholastic Children's Defense Fund Fellowship. I wish each and every one of you the best on your individual publishing journeys. I hope someday that I have the opportunity to hear or read all about it.
Let us go right into Q&A, question and answers for Cassandra and Jenny. We have a question over here on my left. Give me 1 second to get the microphone to you. Up front.
Lisa Yearwood, aspiring bestseller. Again, thanks for that. I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us some rookie mistakes you see with people, unpublished authors, when they're in their manuscripts.
Do you want to start?
Rookie mistakes. I think one thing that authors sometimes, or aspiring authors sometimes do, is they kind of go with what they think is trendy and what's selling. You know, I think you have to write what you're passionate about, and only you can write the story that you've chosen to write. So I think sometimes when people are trying to ride a wave and do what they think is just selling, that sometimes the passion and authenticity doesn't come through in the voice. So I would just say to write what you're passionate about and what, you know, what you believe in and what story is truly burning a hole in your heart.
I would say the other thing that I sometimes see is that someone's in such a rush to send it that they haven't fully developed the ideas. And I know some people enjoy being part of a writer's group and others do not, but if you have one trusted reader who knows you well as a writer and can really urge you to do your very best before you send it in. So many things come through that a lot of editors, myself included, are looking for a reason to set that one aside. But if we can really see heart in there and a true voice, as Cassandra was saying, I think that's your best shot.
Jenny, can you give us a breakdown, the top 10 jobs in the children's publishing industry? Or not top 10, but give me 10.
Like starting positions, you mean? Or
just what are some of the positions that are available for people who are interested in that career, the careers?
Yes.
We've talked about, I mean, everybody wants to write, but what are some other sort of ways in?
Well, that was why I wanted to include some of the other people that I've come across who I really admire, because there's marketing, sales, finance, you know, maybe you're great with people, HR, and the internships. You know, Cassandra mentioned the one that she came in with, and Maya came in to ours, and I think you had exposure in several different departments, didn't you, Maya, or was it just editorial? A lot of different things. And then you get to try your hand at, you know, writing flap copy and things like that. But sales is another great way, you know, just to kind of see how many books are out there and how do you make those books stand out. And that's why I think being in a bookstore is really helpful, or in a library, seeing what kids ask for again and again. You get that sort of experience of just being with the children who are your end readers, or the teens who are your end readers.
There's a young lady at Houghton Mifflin she's just responsible for tweeting. She just tweets. She's a digital social media specialist. Just so many different opportunities. Next question. Yes, over here.
Hello, my name is Lorraine Rogers Jackson, and I have a question about being diverse in genres. I am an author. I have a children's series, but I also just wrote a fantasy novel. And what I find that is met with much surprise that I wrote in this genre. And upon research, I see that there's not a lot of diversity in this genre. So what is the commitment to not only offering diverse books, but also offering diversity in genres where a lot of diversity is not?
Good question.
I mean, I think there's been a call for diversity across all platforms, formats, genres, you know, age groups. You know, I think I could say I did a number of things and people might look surprised that you know what I mean? I think it just goes along with the territory of being one of one or one of a few. So I mean, I would say that there's a commitment to it across the board and people are looking for diversity in all aspects. So I wouldn't let those people discourage you, you know, and feel like you shouldn't be in that space. Because that happens often. That could be any space.
Yeah.
You know?
True. I would agree, and I would also say that fantasy and science fiction right now are really experiencing a rebirth, from what I can see, at least from the things that we're getting in and some of the things that are resonating with teens. Because I would even say, you know, Victoria Aveyard is in that fantasy sci-fi world, and we have something called Illuminae on our list, which also kind of breaks the barriers with sci-fi and fantasy. So yes, we need those diverse voices.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I did come today more as an author or aspiring author than anything else, but as I listen to you all, it is inspiring also to hear what publishing can do. And I'm curious, as a mid-professional or someone who's not necessarily out of school but maybe changing professions, where does that fit in as I look at sort of agents and things like that, they tend to be on the younger side, those that enter the field. How, if you're mid-professional, how is it to transition into publishing?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I always call publishing the last great apprenticeship because it really is so much of kind of learning how it all works from the inside. But I know a number of people who started in publishing and then went into librarianship. And I feel like librarianship is a wonderful way to learn about children's literature and also sort of feed that part of yourself, if you will. And you know, Simmons was mentioned by Jason and also by Kwame, and they have a wonderful program. And it might be easier in some ways to enter publishing through that door than to actually start with the starting salary, which we've all lived through on the publishing side, or also in academic publishing.
Yeah, it's hard. I can't speak to it personally just because I came right out of school and I've been at the same company for the whole time. But even, it's like there are a bunch of publishers, big and small, but at the same time, it's such a small world. And I've seen people, once they kind of get in there and they might be an assistant marketer or an assistant publicist, or, they kind of move around and see what opens up, because sometimes people tend to stay in their jobs for a long time in publishing, and then sometimes they move around a lot. So, even if sometimes if you see a position that might not necessarily be the perfect one for you, you might want to think about just kind of getting in with that company and then seeing the potential for moving around a bit.
Maya?
Hi. So I've been in publishing for 7 months at Penguin Random House, and I wanted to ask the question of, I've noticed when it comes to publishing diverse voices, and it's only been 7 months, and I've already noticed this, that the battle really only just begins when a manuscript is acquired. The difference between a book doing incredibly well and doing like so-so comes down to budget, comes down to marketing and publicity. Which books get the most support from those areas? It's not just editorial, which is where I work. And I wanted to know if there's any advice on how to help ensure or champion diverse books with those with the marketing teams, with publicity teams, with the teams that put together the budgets, so that books with diverse characters have a chance to really succeed. Because if they don't have that support, even if the book is fantastic, even if it should be a Newbery winner, no one will see it because the teams aren't supporting it as much. And of course, there's always a reliance on numbers. I oftentimes hear things like, well, the numbers for this kind of book aren't very high. The numbers for books in fully Muslim universes aren't very high, so we shouldn't make the budget too high for this book because we don't know if it'll sell. There's a lot of ideas of publishing diverse books being a risk in the publishing industry, which makes it harder for diverse books to succeed. So as an editorial assistant, as someone who's trying to help, and as an aspiring writer of color, I want to know how to combat these things so I can make it easier for writers of color with stories with people of color to succeed in the industry. It's a long question, sorry.
Good question.
I do think that's changing, Maya. I think that the We Need Diverse Books movement has brought a lot of attention to this very thing. And I think what we're starting to see in Publishers Weekly now with the rights announcements is that people are spending more on books by people of color. I know on the Knopf list we have 2 coming up. One is called I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican-American Daughter. It's a first novel by a published poet on the adult side. And another is The Stars Beneath Our Feet by David Barclay Moore. And because of the investment we made in acquiring those books, the sales and marketing budgets are expected to be commensurate with that. So I think there is this push now to really support those books in ways that maybe hadn't been true before.
And for me, I try to talk about the books I'm editing any chance I get in-house with my colleagues. You know, if I'm excited about something I'm working on, I'm like, hey, like this is in the folder, because we have a folder that we upload our manuscripts to. Hey, have you read that? Like, I really love it, really excited about it. This woman, she's debuted, she comes in this, you know. So a lot of this industry is about relationships, and that can be true even just within your own little departments and in your own house. I sometimes, you know, pull people and say, hey, like, you know, I'm really excited about this, like, you know, I think, or if I hear something that's going on in the world and on the internet or something, I'm like, hey, this book sounds like, you know, we might be able to push it, you know, because this thing is going on online. So yes, and sometimes it can be, a bit of a struggle for if you're at a company that everyone allocates their marketing dollars in different ways, but sometimes it, you know, you just have to, it gets a little competitive. So I just try to talk about the books that I'm excited about and that I'm working on. Any chance I get, because there's no one else there that's going to advocate as much as I am for that book in-house, like in my department.
Sort of another way to look at it is, can you really afford to wait for the marketing staff to figure out how to market you? And the answer is no, you cannot. And which is why what Jason said, what Jenny said, what Cassandra said is so important in terms of everyone learning the business side of publishing, because you really have to know how to market yourself and how to promote yourself. And so I just had a novel came out on April 5th, and I told one of my publishers, I said, look, let's send out a press release to the Ricky Smiley morning show. And she was like, who's Ricky Smiley? And I was like, yeah, well, that makes sense. And so if we sort of wait on people to figure things out, we got to operate on 2 fronts. We have to sort of simultaneously educate, and we have to sort of do our own thing. Like, that never stops. As a writer, you constantly have to promote yourself and figure out ways to get your book into the marketplace. That's just my aside. The next question? Yes, right here in the middle.
Hi, my name is Renee Jarvis, and I've heard a lot of rumors about the slush pile, and I just want to know, like, how much hope is in slush if you're not agented and not solicited? How much hope is there in just submitting your work?
Well, we do read the unsolicited, unagented manuscripts. Well, everyone has a different policy, so I won't say that, you know, but even every imprint within Scholastic has a different policy. When I was an intern, it was my job to go through the pile and read. But some gems have come out of the slush pile. I believe The Skin I'm In by Sharon Draper came out of the slush pile, and so did...
Is it Sharon Flake?
I'm sorry, Sharon Flake, yes. Sorry. And Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older also came out of the slush pile. So there is hope. You know, I can't give you an equation for it, but I think there is some.
We also read some of the slush. I will say, you know, when I was an editorial assistant at Harper, we found If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, but it was one of 12,000 unsolicited manuscripts. So if you can, try to get to an SCBWI conference. You'll meet agents, you'll meet other writers who can give you their experiences in submitting manuscripts. I just think there's such a font of information, and even if you just do the one-on-one critiques, you'll meet with either an agent or an editor, and they'll often, if they see promise there, they'll say, send me your revision, or send me the whole thing when I'm back at my desk. So it's just such a great, again, as Kwame was saying, a way to network and make sure that your work is read.
It's the website is scbwi.org, and it's an international organization. They have 2 national conferences, one in February in New York and one in August in LA. So the August one is apparently obviously coming up soon, and you can still register for that. But there's a local chapter. There's I know there's a Northern Virginia chapter. Mid-Atlantic, that's what it's called, Mid-Atlantic. And their conference is in October at Dulles, at Holiday Inn in Dulles. And that's a great place for you all to start at the regional and then go to the national level. There's a Children's Book Guild in Washington, D.C., the D.C. Children's Book, or the Children's Book Guild of Washington, D.C. And that's a great place because they have monthly sessions where they bring in speakers like Jason Reynolds and Meg Medina, writers and publishers who are doing this work. And you get to interact and network with other writers as well. Last question. Yes.
Hi, I write YA novels in verse, and I just wanted to get any comments or hear any comments on the future of that genre.
Well, thanks to people like Jackie and Kwame, I think it's in very good shape. So keep going.
Actually, we have time for a few more questions, I'm told. How cool is that? Yes, and we'll do one coming in.
Y'all hear me? Okay, there you go. I'm a high school English teacher, and of course, on that level, there really isn't a place for mentorship. So how could I go about, I guess, acquiring a mentor such as, a Kwame Alexander, or, do I, on what level, I don't want to stalk anybody, but I always have business cards on me. So how do I maneuver that field?
Kwame, how do you think you're accepting mentee?
What a great question. So here's the short answer to that. I remember Nikki Giovanni telling me about a similar situation where somebody was looking for a mentor. And she's like, you don't look for a mentor. A mentor finds you. And how does a mentor find you? A mentor finds you by you putting yourself in a situation. And so Nikki called Tony Medina, she called me, she called a few other people, and she said, I'm doing a book. And it's 100 best African-American poems of all time. And I need some help. I need y'all to go out and find the younger poets. Who do you suggest? There was no money. There was no accolades. There was no name on the cover. She was like, I want you to do the work. And we were like, yeah, all right. And we all did the work. And we all found poets that we knew and loved and could recommend. You do that enough, by default, someone becomes your mentor because you're putting in the work. Mentor is really about you doing the work. It's not necessarily about someone doing the work for you, it's about you doing the work, and through that relationship, they're providing you guidance and direction and support and encouragement. So, I got a couple projects if you want to help me on. But that's my answer to it. I don't know. Do you have anything to offer, Jenny, about that? About mentorship?
I think you're right about the mentor finding you. It's putting yourself in those places where you're exposed to the people who can really impart something to you. I mean, I mentioned Bill, and Bill was such a mentor to so many people that when he passed away and left some money to the Association of Library Services to Children, they established an evaluation program for young librarians, or not even young librarians, but people who were just starting in their library careers, to teach them how to evaluate. And they had people like Deb Taylor, who's been head of the CyberArt Committee, and teaching how to evaluate nonfiction. And just recently, I will say that the CSK committee approached ALSC about sending 2 librarians into the Bill Morris Seminar, sponsoring them. And I think those, people who mentor also beget other mentors. So I think there's an opportunity by going to some of the author events, SCBWI, meeting those agents and editors and designers who you feel can really teach you something, and just staying in touch and letting that develop.
And I will say that I have a couple mentors who don't even know that they're my mentors, because I am just trying to absorb everything that I can from them when I see them speak or in conversation or even on social media. If you follow a few people who you really admire and look up to, just trying to absorb and learn from just every, when you see people speak, just every bit of kernel of wisdom that you can. And I mean, I think that's a great way to learn too.
I have a friend who, she's a brilliant writer, and she was starting out, and I would call her and I'd say, look, I'm doing an anthology, I need a 20-page story. Can you send it to me in 3 weeks? And she did it. I never did the anthology. A year later, let's write a collaborative novel together. You write the first 100 pages, I'll do the next. She wrote 100 pages, I gave her notes on it. I never wrote my 100 pages. Then I did a writer's retreat and invited her and said, we're gonna work on a project together, and had a great time at the writer's retreat. And the project never happened. We had sort of interaction and working on stuff, but it never came to fruition. She just got a 2-book deal with HarperCollins. And it's because over the course of 4 years that she and I had established this sort of connection and interaction, and so she was the benefit of whatever modicum of knowledge I had and access, and she put in the work. But if she had turned down, if she had not said yes, if she had not walked through that door that first time, maybe it wouldn't have happened in that manner. And so I think if you want to find a mentor, you gotta walk through doors. You gotta put yourself in that space. Right, Jenny?
Right, Quan?
Yeah. Yes, right here. She's had her hand up so long.
Thank you. My name is Faye Montgomery, and I am an aspiring graphic novelist, as well as an intern at Macmillan and Northampton Press for the summer. So my question for you ladies is, how is the graphic novel publishing sector different from publishing a work of prose or a picture book?
Do you mean like editorially or?
Everything, because it seems that it's relatively new. I mean, comics have been around for much longer, and I'm wondering about the editorial side, the publicity side, anything you have to share.
Mm-hmm. Well, comics it's kind of its own thing, but at the same time at Scholastic, we publish comics as trade books. So we do publicize and market them as children's trade books, much in the same way that we send them out to the same reviewers, and but there are, they have a lot of comic shows that we can specifically target, like the Comic-Cons. San Diego, New York are the major ones. There's some smaller shows like Emerald City Comic-Con and Toronto Comics Arts Festivals that get a lot of pickup. So I think the cool thing about doing comics at a major publisher is that you kind of get the best of both worlds, and that it's a comic and it's a graphic novel, but it's also being marketed in the larger scheme of the list.
Well, and I would say, some of us are still learning how to do it, without putting Penguin Random House on the spot. But, we've had some nice hits like Roller Girl, and, I just acquired one. That was the first thing I acquired when I got there, and it's called Rickety Stitch, and it's a trilogy, and it's 2 guys who've been friends since 2nd grade, and they have a whole comics following online. But can we translate that to the marketplace? That's going to be a question for us. But where you are, actually, at Macmillan, first, second, you have a font of information there with Mark Siegel and his team. So I think we're all still trying to figure it out, because the kids have gotten there faster than we did, and the librarians and booksellers are on board, and now we have to figure out how to get that to them.
And I will say that part of kind of the equivalent of self-publishing, or using the internet to further your craft, is webcomics have been huge for kind of getting out there. putting your work online, having work to show. Because I'm on Tumblr, I'm on webcomic sites, I'm always looking at Instagram. You know, I sign up people from a variety of ways. So I would encourage you to, if you think about that too.
Different from, do you just edit the manuscript, or will you also look at like the panels and?
Yeah, so most of the graphic novels I've edited, it's the same person doing both writing and illustrating. I only have a couple projects where it's more than one person. So you are definitely looking at it as a whole, the words and the artwork, they tell the story together. So it's almost like I've had to learn to be an art director in a way, as well as an editor, because it doesn't work without, you know, looking at both as a whole. But, you know, my editorial letters are, you know, similar to my prose editorial letters about character and plot and theme and pacing. You know, so, you know, it's different in some ways and the same in others.
I think the biggest difference that I've noticed is that it's important to take those emotional moments in a graphic novel too and give that space. You know, I think one of the things that I've seen is that sometimes there's a tendency to have the pacing be the same throughout, and just giving those moments where you really give, say, a 4-panel stretch for an emotional moment or connection between two characters, just thinking through where do you want that emphasis to be.
Over here.
My question has a little bit to do with not being author-illustrator as well, and how to insert the diversity, the multicultural aspect to that. If you write a universal story and you don't want to have, you know, animals as your characters, can you put in as an art note or something, or in your query, like, I would like this to not default to a white character. You know, I want this. If you don't pick names like Grace Lynn, you know, Ting and Ling, I mean, how else do you indicate that this is a universal story, but I want my characters to reflect multicultural America?
I think you would say just that, you know. I think you would just say that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. Yeah, or in the manuscript, if you put it in parentheses, if you're writing a picture book or a graphic novel, and to just make it clear what your vision is for your characters. I think that's completely reasonable and helpful, you know, because you don't want to get down the line and, you know, there's been a misunderstanding or miscommunication, or the editor has a different vision than you, or thought that you had a vision that you didn't have. So I think just being as clear and upfront as you can be is.
And so I'll add to that. That sounds good. But it doesn't always work like that, and you're not always necessarily thinking like that. So I wrote a book about a rooster that starred as a jazz band with Duck Ellington and Miles Davis. So it's animals. And so I didn't put in my query letter or in my contract that the animals had to be black. I wasn't thinking like that, but when I got the illustrations back, the illustrator had inserted a farmer in the book, and the farmer defaulted to white, which is a whole nother thing, because when you think about the history of jazz musicians and their relationship with their white managers and agents, that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, I'm getting too deep for y'all. So I said to the publisher, nah, not so much. And they said, no, we like it. And I said, no, not so much. We're not going to do that. Let's take the farmer out. And so it's just, I mean, you just got to say it. You just got to say it. And you got to stick, you got to be persistent, and you got to stick to your guns. You know, if it's not in the contract or the query letter. Last question.
Thank you. My name is Pierre Penick, and I'm a high school English instructor, but I want to comment on mentorship. And I think finding a mentor, there's a process of giving. I have been promoting authors for about 15 years, and my first author was a Random House author, and I called Random House and told them there's this new book, I have the review copy, and I want to get in touch with this author. I would like to promote her, but I'm not asking for anything. I'm doing it for the families in my community. Through that escalated more authors, more connections. I have a group of authors now that are not just people that I have helped, but they're friends. I never knew that I would create that, but these are people who would definitely help me if I needed it. So I think, that's an isolated story, but I think that there is a process of giving if you are seeking mentorship. So you have to give a little bit of yourself in any way you can. My question really quickly is, what is trending amongst the teen population as far as writing and what they're reading? Is it style of writing or is it plot? I've asked my teens, what do you prefer, a good plot or an excellent, or a different style of writing that you can relate to? And a lot of them are sort of 50-50, so I'd like to get comments to see what you think.
I wouldn't say that it's one or the other either. I think if they're saying it's 50, I think it just depends on the preference of the reader. I think I tend to gravitate toward character-driven stories. I love a really well-developed character that I can emotionally connect to, and then get into their world and into their plight and what's going on with them. Some people just like that fast, plot-driven, what's happening, how are we getting there, okay, it happened, oh my gosh. So I think it just depends on the preference of the reader. I haven't heard of a trend regarding that sort of thing.
I would agree. I think, if I think about myself as a reader and the kids I taught, they read really widely. So they would read, the Babysitters Club, and they would also read, Newbery winners. And so I think that's also true of teens. With Illuminate, it's been interesting because it is the sci-fi, very plot-driven, but there's also this kind of moral question at its center. So you kind of get pulled into the plot, but you end up doing some deeper thinking around, what is my responsibility to my community, and how do I make a difference as an individual, even if it means going against everybody else. So I think that teens are really keyed into those kinds of searching questions as they're making sense of who they are as they're becoming adults. And I think they can read a wide range of things to try to answer those questions for themselves.
Take a 5-minute break and come back for the real star who just arrived. Please, let's give a round of applause for Jennifer Brown and Cassandra Pelham. 4 minutes and 49 seconds left. We have about a 2-minute warning. Please find your way. All right. What a full day. But it ain't over. It ain't over. All right, so I'm going to point to a side of the room and just tell me, recap one thing we've learned today, something practical we can take home. Over here, raise your hand. Who's got it? Right here, yes. Interesting. I love that. Over here. Yes, in the back. Oh, y'all heard that. Nikki, they were asking about how do you find a mentor? Oh, you don't find a mentor finds you. You got to put in the work. You told me that. Over here. Yes. No? Anybody? Yes. Ah, excellent. Excellent. That's good stuff. Well, speaking of mentors, there are a few mentors of mine in the room, and they don't even know it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to just quickly bring up to the stage the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award winner from 2015, Jason Reynolds. Come on up, Jason. And we are getting a little bit away from the program, but Jason's here. And I felt like it was important to sort of recognize him. And Jason, so if you could imagine for a second that this is OWN, Oprah's channel, and Jay-Z has just filmed his master class, and Sidney Poitier has done his, and Jamie Foxx had a good one. And now Anya has told me I've got 3 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes max. What's your master class? Give it to us.
Process before progress. Process before progress. I think in our industry and as writers in general, I think so many of us want what we want, right? Everybody thinks that they have the gem, the new American classic, but no one's willing to go through all of the things that it takes to actually create something that is, like, so we have this discussion about, I've been here the whole time, about like, yo, what about the slush pile? And what really nice editors won't say is that a lot of stuff in the slush pile is slush. Right? Because there are very few people who are willing to really put in the work, right? To really put in the work. Kwame tells you that his book was rejected a whole bunch of times, but he didn't tell you how many times he wrote the book, right? So I think these are the things. There's this process before progress. The industry is slow, period, first of all. The slowest of all the industries, the arts media industries. But what also has to happen is the amount of time they take editing and critiquing and trying to figure out your book, you have to take twice as long. Writing it, figuring it out, nailing your voice, your style, breaking the rules, learning the rules, breaking them again, finding a mentor, listening to your mentor, not listening to your mentor, right? All of the things, right? And I think that would be sort of my nugget of masterclasses. Process first.
Jason Reynolds has written When I Was the Greatest. Well, before that, My Name is Jason.
Mine too. Yeah.
Mine too. When I Was the Greatest, The Boy in the Black Suit, All American Boys, As Brave as You, should have an R on the end of it, but we're not gonna say that. As Brave as You. Your mother says that?
My mother, she's like, you mean As Brave as You Are? No, I don't mean As Brave as You Are. As Brave as You is the name of the book.
So.
Teachers, right?
He graduated from University of Maryland. He has a couple books coming out every year. He's firmly entrenched in YA and now middle grade novels. I met him at a poetry slam that Dr. Carol Hardy put on at the College of William & Mary in 19 or 2000 or something.
I was 15, 16, 17.
And he won the poetry slam. And so we're just grateful that you were here. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Reynolds.
Thank you. I will say, real quick, really short, I will say this. Everybody who knows me or anyone who knows me knows that they're like, oh, Jason's been around like 3 years. So when we talk about process before progress, Jason's been in the industry for 13 and a half years. Signed in the industry for 13 and a half years. Yep. And you all just learning about me now. Process before progress.
Jason is one of the founding member inspirers, members, advisors, supporters, encouragers of We Need Diverse Books, which is, along with the Center for Poetry and Literature of the Library of Congress, the main sponsor of this here event. Let's find out a little bit about We Need Diverse Movements via a video. Please pay attention to the monitors.
Hi, I'm Ellen. My name is Danielle Clayton, and I started We Need Diverse Books with a bunch of people who really care about diversity in the industry, because a lot of kids get to see themselves represented in the books that we read every day. And not seeing yourself is like being told that you don't exist.
We Need Diverse Books is so important and crucial because every kid deserves to be the hero of their own story.
I read a lot of books that did not have anyone that looked anything like myself. As a child of mixed race, I did not see myself in books.
And I didn't get to see any sort of queer character
far too late in the game. My first book with a gay character, there was a random gay kiss at one point in the story, and I was ashamed for reading the story because I thought everyone would know that I was reading a gay book.
As a teenager, there were not any books about young adults who were black.
I would agree with that. I did not have that at all. So I'm so happy that yours exists, and I want more.
I looked everywhere for a book with a Latina character, and I couldn't find one anywhere, and it was all I wanted as a child.
I didn't see any characters that looked like me, or my husband, or what my daughter looks like. I didn't grow up with any trans kids in middle grade literature. To see yourself and to see people like you or facing issues like you in books is life-changing.
It's important for me to write books where dealing with mental health issues is normalized and seen as something that isn't shameful.
I write stories for every kid who's ever had to show up at school with a doctor's note in their bag, dreading the moment that they have to pull it out and pass it to a teacher.
I am the mother of biracial children. I write for everyone.
I write gay characters in my books because I want the guys who used to shove me into lockers. I want those guys to be able to look at a queer character and root for him and root for her to win in the story.
I want to make sure that everyone is included in my stories.
And I think what novels do so well is that they give us the context that makes us understand that people are people, love is love, lives are lives, teens are teens.
And I really just wanted to show that any girl can be in every girl.
I'm thinking of me as a child, and I'm thinking of all of you guys and all the people that you want to see.
To all the young people out there who are growing up in communities that are seen as colorful communities or communities that are seen as undesirable, my books are to serve as a symbol and a way for you to feel a little less ashamed of where you're from.
You're going to have a lot of people tell you that you're not enough or you're too much. You're enough, and your story matters.
No matter who you are today, or tomorrow, or the next day, we are all part of the same thing.
We want it to be better for you than it's been for us, like, not in the future, but like literally today, like right this minute.
No matter who you are, or how you identify, what you believe in, or how you were born, how you're raised, no matter who you are really, I write for you.
Books can change the world, just like you can change the world. And we want you to know that we create for you, we write for you, so that you can go out and change the world.
We are here to tell your stories.
And everyone else's too. We write for you. We write for you.
I write for you.
That's why I write for you.
That's why I write for you. It's why we write for you.
We write for you.
And I write for you.
We write for you.
I write for you.
We write for you.
I write for all of us.
The founder of We Need Diverse Books, Ellen O, is here. Please stand up, Ellen. When I won the Newbery, I texted her. When I won the Newbery, I texted her and she texted me when I was trying to figure out how much to charge a school for a school visit. I texted her, she texted me. Whenever I am sort of dealing with the woes and the wonders of children's book publishing, I text her. Jacqueline Woodson is the new Young People's Poet Laureate and the 2014 National Book Award winner for Brown Girl Dreaming, her memoir in verse. The book also received the Newbery Honor, the NAACP Image Award, a Silbert Honor for nonfiction, and was shortlisted for the LA Times Book Prize. She's the author of 30 books for young adults, middle graders, and children, among many awards. She's a 4-time Newbery Honor winner, a 3-time National Book Award finalist, 2-time Coretta Scott King Award winner. Her books include The Other Side, Each Kindness, Beneath the Meth Moon, the Caldecott Honor book Coming on Home Soon, Feathers and Miracles Boys, which received the LA Times Book Prize and was adapted into a miniseries by Spike Lee. She's also the recipient of the Margaret A. Edwards Award for Lifetime Achievement for her contributions to young adult literature, the winner of the Jane Addams Children's Book Award, and was the 2013 United States nominee for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. She lives with her family in Brooklyn, New York, where she often has dinner parties and invites writers, and we fry fish, and we drink. And she's just a wonderful, wonderful spirit. And today she is going to sort of bring us home and share with us what it's like to be a legend who's like still living, to be a mentor to so many writers, to be a Black woman who has succeeded against all odds, overcome challenges, to be my friend and to be someone that I admire tremendously. Please welcome Jacqueline Woodson.
Thanks, oh man, this is the kind of room you dream of being in. I feel like Kwame and Jason and Chris Myers, who we've decided cannot bread the fish anymore, are constant, and Rita Williams Garcia, and we're just constantly in rooms talking and planning and scheming, and all of the people from We Need Diverse Books. I feel like we're trying to do this work every single day to get the room to look like this, and to get the publishing houses to look like this, and to get our body of literature to look like this. So I'm so grateful for all of y'all showing up and being in the room. I got a call this morning. I was thinking of this, life happens, right? You wake up and you're trying to do your work and you're on deadline or you're not on deadline, and things just constantly happen. So I was on the train this morning and I got an email from a woman at Brigham Young University. And she was saying that she was putting together she was putting together a book about literature and children's psychology, and it went on, and she wanted to know if I would contribute to it. And it came through my publicist, and she said, how should we respond? Do you want to do this? And I said, why don't you just forward it to me? So she forwarded it to me, and I wrote the woman back, and I said, I've published more than 30 books. I've won a ton of awards. I've been writing for more than 25 years, and I have never once been invited to Brigham Young University. And I said, it could be because I'm writing as someone who is out. It could be that I'm writing as someone who is out as a Black woman. Or it could be that my literature is just not respected by by the children's literature program at Brigham Young University. And I think a lot of you know it's a Mormon university. But whatever the reason is, I feel like historically I've been silenced by your university, and as a result, I don't want to have my name attached to it. And I think one thing that happens a lot for writers is that there are places, especially for writers of color, for queer writers, where we get silenced and we get banned, and our literature gets rejected by some reason because the world that is in that position of power for deciding how that work's going to be represented are not in the world, does not understand the work that we're trying to put into the world, or finds that it might be destructive to the world, or whatever the reason is. It can be a dangerous place when you don't have your people behind you, when you don't have people in a room who are saying, I get what you're saying, it's important, it's valid, it needs to be here. The writer Audre Lorde said that we should wake up knowing we have work to do and go to bed knowing that we've done our work. And even though writers like us have been writing for many years and writing many books, there's still so many stories that go untold every day. And there's such an importance for those stories to be in the world. So I completely agree with Jason. I think that those stories have to be written and rewritten and rewritten. I rewrote Brown Girl Dreaming 31 times before it's the book that's out there. It took me 3.5 years. And it is so much about the process and processing everything. As writers, we walk through the room, we walk through the world, and it feels like our skin is pulled back, and we're taking all the stuff in, everything that happens to us every day, the way people look at us, the things people say, the emails we get, the things our children say and don't say. And we take it in, and then we process it, and we put it back out into the world in some way that we can hopefully better understand it ourselves. I always say I write because I have all these questions, not because I have answers. And the writing process helps me figure it out. I remember reading Nikki Giovanni's book, Knoxville, which started out as a poem and then became a picture book. And it was the story of being in Knoxville in a summer and the food you ate, and it was a very ordinary moment put on the page and made extraordinary. And that's what our lives are as people of color, as women, as queer people. Our lives seem very ordinary to us. The fact that we are still here and able to tell our stories is extraordinary. And that's why those stories need to be on the page for our daughters, for our sisters, for our sons, for our ancestors who weren't even allowed to read and write. We have a right to tell those stories. And I think as Audrey said again, the machine is going to try to grind us into the ground, right? Every day someone's going to say your story is not valid, or they're going to say, we already published some story like that written by someone who does not look like you. Or they're going to say it's not good enough, or your family's going to say don't be putting our business out into the world. But whatever it is, there are going to be these constant silencers. So I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7 years old. My family was part of the Great Migration. My mom came from Greenville, South Carolina to Brooklyn, New York, and settled us in this section of Brooklyn called Bushwick. And writing was not an option. My mom didn't have this idea that she was going to bring 4 children to New York City so that one could aspire to be an artist. You know, you were supposed to aspire to get a job and get the hell out of her house. And so when I was saying that I wanted to be a writer, my mother and grandmother didn't understand that. But I knew that writing was something that I wanted to do no matter what. And I think when you look at the writers who do eventually become household names, it's because they're writing no matter what. They're writing whether or not someone publishes them. They're writing whether or not they get the good reviews. They're writing whether or not they're trolls on the internet, you know, saying mean things about their book. They're writing because they have to write and because they have to put their stories out into the world. And they have to, this is their power in the world. And so I think we don't just write, we kind of bleed that writing. And so when I first started writing, I majored in English in college. I took a whole bunch of writing courses. I still take writing classes. If there's a writer I love, I find out where they're teaching and I sit in on their class, just because there's always something I could learn about the process of writing. When I was a kid, I was really afraid of poetry, so as an adult, I had to kind of work through that and really read and reread poetry and study poets and find the poets who I understood and just crack that code of poetry because I didn't want that fear to silence me. And I think so often it is our fears that silence us and keep us from writing. And I think it's asking ourselves the question, what do we want to say and what do we want to change and how do we want to change it through our words? And so with writing for children, you know, it's that slippery slope. You can't be didactic. I always say I don't write to teach, I write to learn. If I wanted to teach, I'd write textbooks. So I think sometimes people go and think, I'm going to write for young people because I want to teach them this or I want to show them that. And kids read for the same reason we read. They read to hear a great story. And through that great story, they learn empathy, they learn understanding, and they learn how to, they become empowered. But the first step of that writing is getting that good story on the page. And then after I took those writing classes, and I finally found a publisher at Bantam Doubleday Dell, which is now Random House, and worked with Wendy Lamb, who was queen of the slush piles. She's the one who found Christopher Paul Curtis and lots of other great writers, and then eventually came to write at Penguin, where I've been working with the same editor for 14 years now, which is kind of crazy, but, and who lets me write basically what I want to write, but I write what I care deeply about, and I care deeply about young people, as WNDB talks about, seeing images of themselves in the world, because for me as a child, those images were absent. You had to look long and hard to find reflections of yourself, not only reflections of yourself, but reflections of yourself that were written by people who look like you. There were lots of books that were written by white folks about Black people, but I had a hard time finding books where I could trace the book to an African American female author. So it was really important to me. And it was a journey. So I am going to read a short section from my adult book, and I'm not leaving the world of children's books for good. I'm coming back. But I was thinking in terms of what our stories are and the importance of putting those stories on the page. This book is a biography of the neighborhood I grew up in, which is Bushwick. So all the Bushwick stuff is true, and then the fictive element of it are the 4 young women who are walking through this real place. And I think with writing, you're constantly breaking the rules. So I think it's so important to read across genre, to read poetry and fiction, to read children's books and adult books, because each time a writer sits down to create a book, you're telling a new story, and you're telling it in a way that only you can tell that story. So unfortunately, with publishers, sometimes they could be lazy, so they want to see how that book's going to have an impact on the world. So you can't say, well, remember Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, or remember Claude McKay's Man-Child in the Promised Land, or Alice Walker's Color Purple. And then they go, oh yeah, so you're writing in vignettes. Oh yeah, so you're writing about that experience. So that you have to have some kind of mirror, but you also have to have this original story. Sorry. This is Kwame's copy of the book that I promised to bring him. So I didn't want to dog ear it, because then he'd think I was giving him some used stuff. Huh? You have yours. Oh man, sorry, this is Jason's copy of my book. I imagine the women my father brought home taking a place until my mother returned. Each, shh, my kids are sleeping. Each, oh Lord, look at your precious babies, brought her closer. I lay in bed and listened as the clink of ice in glasses and the hushed laughter gave way to sighs and moans. I imagined waking up with a new woman, her hair in curlers, holding her robe closed with one hand, asking if I wanted pancakes or cereal, scouring the cabinets for the last of the Aunt Jemima syrup, sprinkling a bit of cinnamon and sugar when there was none. I imagined strong, sure hands pulling my hair into tight cornrows, telling my brother to take his thumb out of his mouth, kissing my father on the lips as he headed off to work. I imagined the 4 of us at the kitchen table, the thick stink of boiling chitlins gone, replaced by hot sauce and white rice, and the woman who came to stay until my mother returned, asking if I wanted a little or a lot. Years later, I would tell this to Sister Sonia, wanting her to know that I had dreamed our family whole again, that I had believed wholeness was on its way. In a jar on the counter of Pancho's store, there were pickled pig's feet, and he'd scoop out into brown paper. When you said, "I want to choose my own," Pancho said, "No choosing, I choose." His old man eyes moving over your body, and if you were hungry enough, you let him. I imagine the four of us, brother, father, new woman, me, sucking the last of the pickled meat from the pig's foot bone, wrapping the cartilage and bone back into the brown paper, washing it down with Dr. Pepper. Pork rinds were packaged and sold for 15 cents. With hot sauce sprinkled into a plastic bag, you almost had a meal. My brother ate his without the sauce, sometimes adding more salt. On good days, our father took us around the corner and let us buy ham and cheese heroes, the boiled ham cut into thin slices and layered over Italian bread already spread thick with mayo. Some days, my brother preferred the square cuts of spiced ham with its tiny speckles of white fat. That was before. The woman who came didn't tiptoe through our house in the night, didn't ask for just a taste when my father offered her whiskey, didn't sit with us eating pig's feet and spiced ham. She came by way of the Nation of Islam, her head wrapped, her dark dress draping down below her ankles. She said, "My name is Sister Loretta," her body a temple covered and far away from my father's, her thin face free of swine-filled makeup with which unenlightened women painted their faces. She said, "I know how amazing and lovely I am." When she looked down at us and smiled, her dark face broke into something open and hungry and beautiful. She said, "Your father is ready to change his life." She said, "The food you're eating is the white devil's plan to kill our people." She came into our apartment on a Sunday morning, pulling down dusty pots and pans from the cabinet to wash in warm soapy water, humming slowly as she worked, my father at the table, reading from the Quran, a watery Brooklyn sunlight falling over the pages. Her hands were large and moved as though they'd always known our tiny kitchen, with its yellowing sink and peeling linoleum counter. I watched them, imagining they were my mother's, and that they were again in Sweet Grove with our broken and that we were again in Sweet Grove with our broken stove and dusty bookshelves. I sat in the kitchen doorway, my knees pulled up to my chin, eyes lifted toward her. Her breasts were heavy beneath the dark dress, but she wasn't a heavy woman. Still, her body seemed to hold promises of curves, of the soft and deep spaces I was just beginning to understand. One day I'd have full breasts, hips, and large hands. One day my body would tell the world stories beneath the fabric of my clothes. So one thing, when I was writing Another Brooklyn, I realized that so many of the stories on the page, in the world, are not always representative of the kind of intricacies of our growing up. I always say, you know, especially in families of color, you know, you throw a stone and you hit the uncle in prison, you throw another stone and you hit the poor relatives, or they throw a stone and hit you, their poor relatives. But there are all these nuances to our community, all these stories that have not been told because of this layer of shame to them. And I think that if we tell those stories with the level of deep respect that we have, I'm thinking of When I Was the Greatest, Jason's book, and the first time reading that and thinking, wow, he's nailing all of this, he's telling the truth. And for fiction, that's the first point that we need to bring to the page, is that deep and important truth, and then the rest follows. So I'm happy to be here in the room with y'all. And now Kwame's coming up, and I'm gonna sit down and we're gonna talk junk.
Jacqueline Woodson. Before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to recognize a woman activist, poet extraordinaire who's here today, and just have her, if she wouldn't mind, answer that question of how do you find a mentor? You all, and then the other thing is, how cool would it be, like, for you all to get a picture of like Nikki and Jackie on stage together. Y'all get up for Nikki Giovanni. Nikki, can you just share, if you wouldn't mind, with the writers and business people and students who are here today, how do you answer the question, how do you find a mentor?
What should I do here? That's okay. I was listening to Jacqueline and I realized, you know, I'm no good at things like this. I'm not. I'm here because the magic word to me is Kwame. And they said you were going to be here, and I've had some health problems, and Jenny it is wonderful to me, and I love her so much. And Jenny said she would drive me over because she knows when we say Kwame, we have to go. I'm hoping you do Aruba, someplace like that. I think that, at least for me, you know, where I am is the only thing that matters to me. I'm just not helpful to any of you. The only thing that matters to me is where I am now. And what I know is that I am a part of a generation that no longer exists. You and I were talking about it recently. I am a part of the generation of segregation, and that's over. No matter what bullshit you're going through, no matter who makes you unhappy, no matter what you don't see or do, none of that, it's over. You are a part of the generation of finished with segregation, so you're going forward. When we look at, because I love books so much, I really did. When we look at The Crossover, when we look at Brown Girl Dreaming, you are part of another generation. And looking at what you have to do, you can use the history. There's no question, because there's a lot of history out there, but you don't know what we knew. You know something else. And I think it's so important for the young writers to write about what they do know. So we end up, well, what I know best right now, I'm sitting here with two writers that I totally admire. When we look at The Crossover, and when we look at Brown Girl Dreaming, we're looking at something, I couldn't have written those. You couldn't write Gemini, My House. You couldn't write what I wrote because I came up fighting a system. And you came up now having to create something. Am I making sense?
You are.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important. You know what made me really angry? That they actually had the nerve to correct, as they put it, roots. I can't think of anything dumber than somebody, I can't, it just pissed me off. How in the world, if you're gonna redo something, redo Gone with the Wind. That's the truth.
It's so true.
And somebody says, oh, you know, we found out more information. You didn't find out anything. Alex wrote his story. Leave it alone. Show it again. But Alex's story is what it was. And now all of a sudden it's like, we're going to show you, oh, Kunta went out, and the reason that he got captured was that he was looking for a girl. I mean, it's just crap. And he wanted to go over to Timbuktu so that it just made me so angry. You have no idea. And I'll never forget Scarlett pulling up those carrots at the halftime, for those of us who've seen, at the halftime point and say, I'll never be hungry again. And we know, we who know our history, we know that the reason Scarlett and her family were not hungry at that point was that the slaves that they had mistreated took the yams that they had hidden. Sherman didn't recognize yams. Sherman knew carrots. Everybody knows carrots. Hell, you put carrots on, everybody knows carrots. Sherman knew carrots. He burned the carrots. He didn't know the yams because they looked like rocks. And it was the rocks, it was the yams that they said, Miss Scarlett, here's something for you to eat, which you would have never done for them. We are a great people. And that's that has to be shown. That just has to be shown. And I'm no good here. I'm just glad to be here.
You are amazing.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what mentorship is. It's sitting at the feet of people who have come and done the things that you only dream about, and people who have done it under circumstances you could never imagine. And Jackie and I write. We both wrote books in verse, and we both have been influenced and inspired by countless poets, including Nikki Giovanni. So I'm thankful. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I wanted everybody to see you and to remind you that tonight at the Folgers Shakespeare Theater, it's theater, right? Theater. At 7:30, Nikki and Hakeem Adabuti and myself will be doing a conversation on the Black Arts Movement, and it is sold out though, so. Yeah, so I'm just telling y'all, if y'all don't have tickets, I just want y'all to know about it. But Nikki Giovanni, everyone.
Hold on, Nick.
First question for Jackie Woodson. Over here. Yep, over here.
Hello. Whoa, sorry. My name is Alexis Smithers, and I'm a queer Black writer. And I wanted to know, I write from this quote, I had to write a story I could survive in. And I was wondering, how do you create in a way that you forgive yourself so that you can still live in this world and not stay stuck in the story you write?
Forgive myself for what?
Well, there's a lot, as you said, there's a lot of shame in like family sector when you write about that kind of stuff. And I was wondering if you have to forgive yourself for the things that you promised you'd keep a secret.
I never made any promises. So, but I did, you know, it's interesting because when I was writing Brown Girl Dreaming, because it's my story, right? And I have there are 4 kids in our family, and each of us would probably tell that story differently. Because kids have different experiences inside the same family. And so and that's why it's a memoir, right? Because it's my memory. And one thing I was respectful though, I did show my siblings the parts that they showed up in and ask them if it was okay. You know, did they feel okay with me putting this in the world? Just because I want to they're my family, you know, and I want to keep them as close as I can. So I did ask them, was that okay? And the one thing in that, my brother didn't want me to talk about his dad because he has a different dad, and I respected that. So I didn't feel any shame in not telling that story because my sense was that's Roman's story for him to tell when he's ready. And it was Adrienne Rich who said, how can I tell my story when you're standing on my throat? And I think that happens a lot, that people try to tell other people's stories, and that's when it gets dangerous. And I didn't want to tell anyone else's. I wanted to tell mine, and that was my story. And I didn't feel like with Roman's story that I was hiding anything, because it's like, here's my brother, here's, you know, now he looks different than we do. And it was what I understood at that time about who he was. But I think you know, Audre Lorde said, your silence will not protect you. We can sit in our corner as mute as bottles and we will still be no less afraid. And I really believe that it's so important to not walk through this world fearful of anything because that's the world silencing you. And it's important not to be silenced.
Over here.
How did your family respond to that book in particular? But like, are they fans of your work?
You know, I think it's complicated. My sister loves it because, of course, she comes off being Odella. I don't know if my older brother read it. He's happy to have it on his shelf, but I don't think the bind is cracked. And Roman loves it. Roman's really proud of me. So sadly, my mom died about a year into the writing of it, so she never got to see it as it is. And my relatives in South Carolina, many of whom are still witnesses, they like it. They actually helped me with a lot of it. So I think they're happy. I think family is always nervous when family writes a book because it's like, do I dare crack this? What am I going to find inside?
Jackie, I was telling everyone earlier that this symposium, this masterclass came together because I was talking to my editor and I said, do you have any editors of color? You know, what's going on? Are you working on that? And she was like, no, I haven't been able to find any. There aren't any out there. And so part of that to me is a cop-out And part of that is, well, I need to make sure that do my part to make sure there are editors of color who are on the horizon. And so I texted you and I said, let's do a symposium, a master class at the Library of Congress. And so I just wanted you to speak to that, like addressing that issue when an editor says, well, there aren't a whole lot of editors of color out there, and what that means, and what's the responsibility of the people in the audience, and so forth.
It's such a good question in terms of, I think that one thing We Need Diverse Books is doing is they're doing internships in publishing, and money is going toward getting people a place to live in New York while they're doing their internship, because that's one of the hardest things, is to be able to afford New York City, where so much of the publishing is happening. I mean, we know all the editors of color in publishing, especially African American editors. We know both of them. I mean, there are a couple more. But I remember Jason and I talking, and he was saying that someone was asking, and he didn't have anyone locked and loaded to say, look, here's someone, and that's the hard part, to be pushing for this change and not knowing where to find the people who could do the work. So I think that it's hard, and I think it is so important. I think it's great to want to be a writer. I think editors change the world in that they get us into the world, and they get these great books into the world. So I don't know. I mean, I'm excited for what We Need Diverse Books is doing. I'm excited for anyone who's thinking about going into the role of being an editor. Children's books is really fun. We all know each other, and it's a great place to be. So, and also the publishing program at City College is a great place that's trying to groom more people of color to go into publishing. On June 16th, or is it the 19th, Amistad is having its 30th or its 30th anniversary party, and Amistad is the Black imprint at Harper. So I don't know, it's a party that's open to the public, so people should come. It's at Mist in Harlem, and there's going to be a lot of networking. A lot of times when we get together, that kind of networking happens.
Amistad was founded by a man by the name of Charles, I want to say Harris, but he was the publishing director at Howard University Press. And then he founded a Black publishing company called Amistad, and it became an imprint of Harper. Mm-hmm. And that was 30-some years ago when he was doing what, 40-some years ago when he was doing what Jason did with Lee and Low in '91. And so it starts out with this vision, this dream, and it can really expand if you stay with it. Mm-hmm. And so, and I was published by Amistad, you're published by Amistad with Another Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ellen, you have a question right here?
Where are you going to be interning?
No, I did it last year at Hachette.
Oh, cool.
We have a question right here in the front. He's going to bring the mic to you.
I had a question, because you said with the Brigham Young, and of course I've spoken, I would speak for the devil, it doesn't matter, because what I have to say, I have to say, and it's not going to change. I just wondered why you wouldn't let them or have them have your work as a part of it.
Why I wouldn't do it at that point? Because I felt like it was a dishonest representation of what and it wasn't. It was for a magazine that she was putting together, and I felt like if you're representing the people in this magazine but not representing them at your institution, just felt dishonest to me. Have you spoken at this was this morning, so I emailed her. I haven't gotten her response yet. But it'll be a long dialogue. I can keep emailing forever.
He's pretty much.
How do you feel about hard stances? Because I think it's, So the Jacqueline Woodson of today, right, a person who has sort of transcended the wall that a lot of people in this room are trying to get to the wall, right? So how do you feel about these hard stances that you're making in terms of what are the hard lines that you're coming into because there are people who are trying to come into the industry. Do you, right, are there things that you need to hold firm to? Are there things that, are there compromises that are coming your way that you need to navigate? I mean, what could you, what light could you shine on that?
Well, I think all of us can, I mean, I think Kwame and Nikki can speak to it too, in terms of there are deep personal beliefs you have that you never cross the line about. I remember for 2 administrations in a row, I was invited to the White House, and I was like, no, I'm not going, because I don't believe in the work these people are doing. And my publisher kind of leaned on me a little bit and said, this is great publicity you need. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. And I've never regretted it. And I think that the stuff that you feel deep, you know, at your core about being the thing that, you know, for me, I was like, I'm not going to be the smiling Black person in that photo. And so that stuff that you feel deeply about is important to you, and you can't sell your soul on that. I think that something like this, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been an issue because it wouldn't have been 20 years of not being invited there. So, so I think some of the earlier journals and stuff, if they asked me to contribute, I did it without even thinking about it because I wanted that kind of recognition. But I definitely do. I mean, and this has been me from the womb in terms of having these deep personal beliefs and not wanting to compromise. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think you have to decide for yourself what are those lines, and that comes from how are you raised? You know, what are your ideas and ideals? What kind of artistic and writerly integrity are you going to have? And you got to decide that. And the thing is, if you just yourself, if you're just authentic, you can never sort of get caught or get caught up because you're always being yourself. Nikki likes to say, or in this, I quote this a lot in this interview with Claudia Tate, Black women writers. Nikki talked about dancing naked on the floor. And you do it, and if you like it, cool. If you don't, go home. But I'm going to do what I do. And I think you just got to do that, whatever it is. And it may evolve, because we don't remain the same, we grow. But you do have to be authentic. That's what I think.
Oh, right there in the stripes. See?
Yes. We'll come to you next. Yep.
This question is for both Kwame and Jacqueline. A number of people in the room might know this, but I don't know this. How did you come into writing novels in verse, and who influenced you?
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Ruth Foreman, who is an esteemed poet and was the author of several books, including We Are the Young Magicians, which won the Barnard Poetry Prize. Sonia Sanchez selected that book. She also wrote a book called Renaissance. And so yeah, so cool. Ruth Foreman, y'all.
The first book I wrote in verse was a book called Locomotion. And it was a collection of poems told from the point of view of an 11-year-old boy who was in foster care and separated from his sister. And he's in the 5th grade, and his teacher introduces poetry and different forms, and he realizes that he can tell his story through this form. And that this is where his genius lies. And so I didn't know that I was going to write a book in verse, but as I wrote and rewrote, I realized that I would be breaking that first rule of writing, which is show, don't tell, if I had this story of this boy writing poetry and the whole book wasn't representing that. And so at that point, I was reading a ton of poetry and researching different forms, you know, studying different forms. So when I got to Brown Girl Dreaming, again, I knew I was writing a memoir, and I was writing down memory. And I knew that memory came in these small moments with all of this white space around it. So the form was decided that way. It made sense. And then as I went back, as I started rewriting, I realized I wanted to begin to shape it so that the poetry was more intentional. And then I added the haiku, so it's interspersed with all these how to listen haiku, and those were to basically be this kind of pull out on how one becomes a writer. So at the writing and the rewriting helped decide what the eventual form was.
I think for me, we can bring this sort of back full circle because we're about to close out, and this is a Black Arts Movement event, tribute, celebration. For me, when I look back at the poets that I read and studied and got excited about in college and beyond, it was Hakeem Adabuti's But He Was Cool, But Him Was Cool. Him was refrigerator cool. And it was sort of taking and Nikki Giovanni's I Was Born in the Congo, which is like a real cool, hip way to say once upon a time. I mean, but it really, and so these poets from the Black Arts Movement were writing these stories in one poem. They were giving you a beginning, a middle, and an end in 20 and 30 and 40 lines. And of course, that came from the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes. I woke up this morning about 3:30. All the ladies in town were gathered around me. Sweet gals was a-moaning, Sylvester's gonna die, and 100 pretty ladies bowed their heads to cry. I woke up a little later, about 4:30. The doctors and undertakers both at my door. Tell all my mourners to mourn in red, because there ain't no sense in me being dead. He's telling a story. And so you're getting these stories. And so when I started writing poetry, I was telling stories in these poems. And so it took me maybe about 15 years, but I feel like it was a natural progression to get to the point where, okay, well, I've sort of figured out how to have fun telling stories in poems. How can I now group these poems together and tell a story in a full, complete novel? And the first book that I read that sort of showed me that that was possible was 2 books. It was Sharon Creech's Love That Dog, and it was Hope Anita Smith's Keeping the Night Watch and The Way a Door Closes. And those were really phenomenal novellas in verse. I think we have time for one more question.
The one right there.
Yes, right here. Yes, thank you.
So I probably should have asked this question a little earlier, but it came to mind when you were standing up there. When you go to a publishing company, where does the money come from? Do you have to have your own money to establish your own company?
That's a great, great question. So in terms of publishing a book, so publishers, mainstream publishers, pay you. They give you an advance on signing, and what an advance means is that they'll publish, it's money up front, and then a whole bunch, once those books sell enough to cover that advance, then you start getting royalties, usually 10% escalating to 12%. So there's this whole financial system to it. Self-publishing is different. Self-publishing, you pay to publish your book, and then all the money that comes that you sell the books for, you earn, right? So then you put up your own advance and then earn it back, and then once you've paid yourself off from paying for that book, all that money is money that's yours. So some people self-publish, some people go the mainstream route. Some people self-publish when the mainstream doesn't buy their book. The thing about the mainstream is you have a publicist, you have an editor, you have a person who designs your cover. You have all of these people in-house that the publisher pays. Self-publishing, you have to pay for all that yourself, and you have to sell the book yourself. You have to get it out there yourself. So does that make sense? Okay.
All right, let's end with this. Jackie, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You just give me the first, your answer.
Okay.
When I say John Steptoe, what comes to mind?
Stevie.
Stevie.
My name is Robert, but my mama don't call me no Roberty. I love that book.
John
Does everyone
Steptoe.
know Stevie?
You got to know Stevie, John Steptoe. He got his book deal when he was 18 or 19.
Was he? I didn't realize he was that
18 or
young.
19.
His son is Javaka Steptoe. It was the first book I read that had people who looked like me and talking like the people I knew.
What are you reading now?
Oh, right now I am reading Gail Foreman's new book. And I'm also reading, well, my son is reading Jason Reynolds' new book, and he won't peel it off and let me finish reading it. And I am also, I can't remember what else. It's on my iPad. That's so bad.
Why is children's literature important?
Children's literature is important because children are going to change the world. And they're open and they're honest and they're hungry, and we were all children once.
Do you have a favorite word?
Do I have a favorite word? That's a good, I think ding dang is what I say most. That's 2 words. There's a hyphen.
Last bit of advice you want to, or statement or quotation that you want to offer to these. This started with a text between you and I. I mean,
Yeah.
we make things happen when we want to. And so, what do you want to leave? What's the last piece of information you want to leave them with?
You have the power. So just know that there's no excuse. You have the power, and you have the power to change the world. It's every single day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jacqueline Woodson.
Thank you.
I want to thank Jason Lowe, Cassandra Pelham, Jennifer Brown, Jacqueline Woodson, Jason Reynolds for coming up, for each of you for being a part of this masterclass today and for offering hope and inspiration and information. It was invaluable. Did you all feel like it was worthy? I want to personally thank the Center for Poetry and Literature, the Library of Congress, Anya Creighton, and Robert Casper for hosting this event, for doing the wonderful work. Let's give it up for the Center for Poetry and Literature. And certainly, we need diverse books. Thank you for doing the behind-the-scenes stuff to really pull this off. We really appreciate you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.